Hello there, and welcome to the Bitcoin Takeover podcast. This is season 16, episode 51. Probably episode number 300 overall. I gotta check that, but I was getting very close to this milestone. We are live with Bowe, a brilliant cryptographer and engineer who's been working on Zcash for a decade, and he is responsible for finding a fix for the hidden inflation bug, which was not exploited, and you're gonna have to explain how we know that it was not exploited. You also came up with Halo and Halo 2, which was the way to eliminate the trusted setup, which, by the way, is the reason why I think Bitcoiners were not so keen on Zerocash back in 2013 because of the trusted setup. You came up with a solution to that. And now you're working on something which is incredible. It's called Project Tachyon, and it aims to scale ZK SNARKs to billions of people, which is incredible. For the longest time, we have been saying, well, privacy doesn't scale. You can't have both privacy and a lot of transactions. So it's really good to have you, Bowe. You're a legend. There are guys like Liam Egan, who is a legend also in Bitcoin, who look up to you. And I've also heard stories of other engineers and cryptographers learning from you and being mind blown that you're just so good. And you're also 1 year younger than me, which I find amazing. It's good to have you on.
No, it's really awesome. I don't really do podcasts and stuff like that very often, but I really wanted to be on this one. I think that would be a really fun conversation. So really appreciate coming on.
Something else that I have to mention before we start, because I can already anticipate what some Monero people will say. We established that we're going to do this like a month ago, as in we set the date of the interview. It was before the massive pump. It was before, I don't know if you were aware that this was going to happen. It's October, but
No
anyway,
clue.
it's a weird coincidence that at the same moment when we're doing this, the price is above $200, and I said I will do the dance on live stream if it hits $200, and it's a weird coincidence, man. So I gotta clown myself once again and become included in memes and whatever. And I'm pretty sure if the price goes below $100, Monero Bros will copy this and make fun of me.
Oh yeah, that's why I'm working up my courage to cringe myself or clown myself a little bit. I've historically I've been pretty shy about celebrating whenever the Zcash price is up, because I just don't want that being taken, and when the price is down, like, oh, look at you, celebrating before you get in the end zone, sort of stuff. There's a long way to go. There's always a long way to go, but it is good the price is up. So sure, I'll take the pump dance. That's fine.
Okay, do it.
All right.
That's really good.
Should be able to hopefully edit that in, put in some laser eyes or something.
I'm gonna ask someone to do this.
You got to get the cringe out really early, because I hate doing talks and things like that, because I really don't want to screw up. But at the very beginning, if I screw up like a little bit and have to correct myself, the rest of it goes really well, because, oh, I already screwed up, so I don't really care. Now I don't really care at all. So
Okay, so let's start the more serious part of our conversation. And by the way, I set this up, so I put a QR code in the middle of our video. You can send encrypted messages using shielded transactions. So if you have any questions for Sean and you want to send that in a shielded transaction, I can read that out loud. I was thinking maybe I could basically show the screen from Zashi wallet, but I don't want Monero Bros to send me anything that's gonna take us I don't know, to get YouTube to ban us or whatever, just because that's on screen. So I'll be a bit cautious, just a bit. But I guess I'll be reading messages through the episode, and you can send encrypted messages, because Zcash is not just a money platform; it's also this encrypted messaging app, which is amazing. Is it better than Signal in this way?
no. I mean, if you're using it as a messaging app, then you don't have forward security and all the kinds of features that you would have in Signal, that a messaging app should have. I wouldn't say that it's better in the pure cryptographic sense, but it's really useful. It's I guess with sealed sender and signal, I'm not really sure if you could argue whether or not the anonymity is better. I'm not sure. Um, I don't like using it as a messaging platform, but a lot of other people do. That's something I've had to get used to over the years. Um, purely from a protocol design perspective, it irks me that we have these memos because they're so big and they take up resources. Um, all the transactions, they take up space in the blockchain, and it's not a scalable feature that we, at least as implemented, it's not scalable. And so anytime we're thinking about ways to improve the payment protocol, um, memos comes up, and I get hounded about it once or twice a week. Somebody will say, "Hey, I really love this feature in Zcash. Are you going to get rid of it in Tachyon? Please don't get rid of it." And I feel like some obligation to figure out some way to incorporate that in the strategy. But it is something that people love.
Yeah, it's super cool. Monero cannot do this, and I'm pretty sure that the Monero bros are not happy about it, and they would not acknowledge it. But let's start with your story. Like, you have been around in Zcash for a decade. Do you have a past in Bitcoin? Have you been involved with building Bitcoin? Were you part of the group that was promoting Zerocoin or Zerocash in 2013?
So yeah, I guess my background is I I used to follow. I used to be kind of like pseudo involved in Bitcoin really early on. I have a million stories that are interesting, some of which I might tell someday. But yeah, I just used to sort of lurk a little bit in the Bitcoin development spaces, and so I've interacted with all the OGs and the uh, characters and stuff in that community. Um, and over the years, I started doing little experiments and learning on my own about consensus algorithms and cryptography and all that kind of stuff. And I had this sort of hobby project where I was actually building. It was like a uh, sort of like a private cryptocurrency version of Bitcoin. I don't even remember how it worked, but I know it was nothing like Zerocash. But when the Zerocoin and Zerocash papers came out, I became a little groupie on the Zerocoin and Zerocash like subreddits, and um, hanging out and kind of waiting. Well, when is this going to come out? I stopped working on my hobby projects. I'm like, oh, it's pointless. You have these brilliant cryptographers, you have snarks and stuff that are coming out, which are amazing that those even work, especially that they're so small. Um, so yeah, I sort of gave up. Just wanted to see, okay, when is this thing going to come out? And by chance, I was hanging out with Andrew Miller, and he's a friend of Zuko, and he said, "Hey, Zuko's hiring to." He's actually working on Zerocash. It wasn't even called Zcash, I think, at the time. This was in 2014 or something, and I was like, "Oh, cool! That sounds awesome." Um, and after a long time, I mean, they had to raise money and all this other stuff's going on, but after a long time, eventually, um, I was sort of asking. I was on Bitcoin Dev or Bitcoin Wizards or something like that on IRC, and I was asking about any developments of Snarks since the last time I talked to Andrew Miller and some of these other people. And Zuko saw that I was, still really interested in this, and he's like, "Hey, you want to come meet me?" And it turned out that he lived around Boulder, and so that's been a help to have him nearby. So I live in Colorado, so um, I just got the job, and I love this stuff. I love privacy. Um, I love cryptocurrency stuff, and I love cryptography. So it worked out great, I think. So that's how I ended up in. I wouldn't have believed that I would be working on the project at the time, but it worked out. I got really lucky, really lucky.
It's a pretty cool story. And how old were you at the time? I think you're 32 right now, so you're 22 when you started working on Zcash. So you're much younger when this was happening.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I think when I first talked to Andrew Miller about this, I just um, turned 21. In fact, I had my first drink, I think, in Las Vegas. I was in Vegas, hanging out with him when My birthday just happened, and then, yeah, so pretty fun stuff. I was pretty young, yeah.
So when did you discover Bitcoin, and what was it that drew you towards it?
Um, so Bitcoin, I hung out with lots of like hackers and script kiddies and all that kind of all that kind of people on the internet growing up, and being able to send money around in those communities. You could only really rely on shady or unreliable companies. Like if you just wanted to send your friend some money because you bet him that the Broncos were going to win the Super Bowl or something like that, um, which of course they didn't that year. Uh, how do you do that? Well, you can't really rely. Like my friend is anonymous. I didn't know who he was, and he was like, I'd known him for so long, and he didn't want to tell me his name. So how do you interact with people financially on the internet just for wholly legitimate, non-criminal things, where you're just trying to keep your financial history private, and you're not trying to allow somebody else to just take your money like PayPal does all the time, take your money and freeze it, and then demand that you send them KYC stuff in or whatever. So Bitcoin, when it came out, there were a lot of other things that people had been building over the years that hadn't really worked out, and so I figured at first that it would probably fail. But when I looked into it, and this was maybe back in like 2011, maybe earlier than that, I forget. Um, when I looked into it, I saw how it worked technically, and I'm like, oh, that's awesome. And that's one of the brilliant parts of the Bitcoin white papers. You can be pretty much an amateur, and at least at the time, and I was just a kid, so I could look at that and go, oh, I see how this solves that problem, and how nobody had thought of solving it that problem, the problem in that way, using proof of work and all that. So, so I was really excited about it, just permissionless sending money around. But I also knew fundamentally there'd be new advances in cryptography that would make it private. And so I was just waiting and hoping maybe I could contribute to making it more private in the future. But yeah, pretty much that's my backstory in Bitcoin. I never really contributed to Bitcoin's development. I did sort of. I was I like I said, I lurked on things. I was one of the co-authors of BIP 39 with all the seed phrase
Oh, that's amazing, because
words.
I know it was Slush, it was Thick, and it was Thomas from Electrum who later decided to withdraw from the project.
Yeah. I don't know. I just jumped in and sort of just cleaned up the documentation and just random stupid things. But it was no serious. I never really contributed seriously to Bitcoin's development in any way or into any real BIPs. I was just lurking. Oh.
So when was the moment when you realized that this is not really private? Was it early on, or did it take you a while to figure it out?
Oh, it was obvious it wasn't private from the beginning. So it was just a matter of time before. I mean, it was totally broken when it came to privacy. Um, there wasn't a moment I ever thought that I thought it was fundamentally flawed from the beginning. And most cryptographers, that's how they felt too. Um, they absolutely know, if you're a cryptographer, you know that uh, you have to, if you're going to say that something's private, like like the protocol itself, that is, you have to have some sort of notion of what it means for it to be private. And then you have to rigorously prove that it satisfies that notion. And there's so many ways that can go wrong, which is why the notion has to be really, really strong. Bitcoin had obvious issues, fundamental issues that you could see without even having to study it rigorously. But definitely, it was nowhere near close enough to have good privacy. And people had always been tracing the source of coins and stuff like that in Bitcoin, and um, just it was just a property of the system that it was not private at all. It was just, yeah, it was obvious to everyone at the time. It's obvious, hopefully obvious to everyone now. It's kind of amazing how I was seeing something on X yesterday where somebody was like, Bitcoin's already private, and it was just the
Yeah,
biggest cope in the
because
world.
he's basically conflating privacy with deniability, as he's saying, well, there's no proof that once I post this address, the person who's sending me the transaction is really the person who owns that UTXO. I think that was the argument, that there
Oh,
is plausible
that's a bad argument.
deniability, and you can say, well, it could have been someone else. It doesn't have to be that person. But you can
Right.
say
And
the same with bank accounts, right? Like maybe someone else was using the person's card or whatever to make a payment.
yeah, just like authority, custody. The other thing is the other argument that you see a lot, and I was seeing a lot yesterday was, oh, I'm going to post an address, find out who I am, or find out who this person is, which is just a really lazy argument for how. I mean, it just there's so many things wrong with that argument. Um, there's so many different kinds of adversaries that you'll have when you're sending money around or doing anything on an online protocol, and just saying dox me bro on X is such a silly uh, reductionist way of thinking about privacy. So you see that not just from the Bitcoiners but also from other privacy projects in the space as well, where they say, oh, you don't think our privacy project's private enough, then figure out where my money is coming from or whatever, which is just not, it's just not how you should think about privacy. That's not how cryptographers think about it, and that's not how your adversary thinks about it. They have more resources, they have more information, they have more context. They can be a different party to you than just some random person on X. They can be somebody targeting you. They can be someone sending you and receiving payments from you. So it's yeah, that's not how you should think about privacy.
Yeah, you said this just before. I was going to mention that the fact that there's a QR code on the screen means that people who are skeptical about Zcash's privacy can actually try to figure out how many transactions were sent and which amounts were sent. But then again, you're mentioning that this is the wrong way to look at privacy.
Yeah, when you're talking about the QR code, what do you mean? Like, yeah, what do you mean?
I put this
Like,
QR code for people to ask questions, right?
right,
I already got like 6 or 7 of them. But when people scan the QR code, they can see the address, and then they can paste the address in a block explorer, and they're not going to see anything because it's shielded.
right. Yeah.
But this is the wrong way to look at privacy, right?
No, that seems like a privacy property you should have, not knowing when other people pay an address. That seems like a totally legitimate. That happens to be a property that we have in our system. It's a property that we simply just we just added because we needed to. We considered the address not to be a capability to also see when payments are sent. We actually have the conversations like that when we're doing protocol and UX design all the time in Zcash, and it even comes up in Tachyon, where we actually have to say, okay, if you could have an address where you could see when it receives payments, but it was intended to be a one-time use address, does this change the scalability properties of the protocol? Does it make it more efficient? Does it change the payment flow in some way that's beneficial? Is it worth the trade-off of adding that capability? So I guess the answer to your question is, yeah, we should think about privacy in terms of we should analyze it in terms of capabilities and strong notions, and try to prove those notions hold categorically, and not just plug leaks by going, oh, I can figure out this and that. Okay, I'll churn my coins, or oh, my values are public, so I'll just throw a Peterson commitment there, but the transaction graph's broken under a quantum adversary or something. It just a total fundamental comprehensive analysis of privacy is something that we try to do throughout everything we do.
Yeah, in Bitcoin, I have been a big fan for a long time of a privacy wallet that's called Wasabi that does CoinJoins. And what I liked about it is how it does both divisions and consolidations of UTXOs. So it adds an extra layer of deniability. It's not privacy because you cannot hide the amounts. And basically, your anonymity diminishes or perishes over time as some of the actors involved in these CoinJoins are registering to KYC exchanges, and it becomes much more obvious which one of the inputs could have been you.
Yeah, that's an
So,
example of sort of plugging leaks where you haven't taken a comprehensive step. You've sort of just obscured or hidden information from some parties, or made it so that certain things don't have to end up on chain. But it's really hard to explain to a user what privacy properties they're actually getting from your system if there's so many contexts in which the user has no idea that their behavior, which seems sensible, which the wallet is allowing you to do, will screw up their privacy, and so they have to take active steps to understand how it's working fundamentally. That is another aspect of privacy. We shouldn't rely on the users having to think about it. It should just be private completely.
well, yeah, but isn't that contradictory in the context of Zcash's design where privacy is optional? Like, the users do
So
have to think about privacy and they do have to voluntarily shield their funds.
yeah, I think what matters is that the user's wallet, the privacy that you get, ultimately, whether the protocol is private or semi-private or whatever, it doesn't matter. The privacy you get is up to your wallet. So if your wallet, if informs you what you're doing is not keeping you private or is hurting your privacy in some way, then that's okay. But what your wallet does should be by default making you private by default. I mean, if there's any default, it's determined by the wallet, in my opinion. Um, so, for example, Zashi, under normal situations, you can't really do things with Zashi that would ever reveal any information about your how much money you have or the history of your transactions to your adversary, which would be the person you're paying or whatever. Um, you don't accidentally reveal that sort of information using Zashi because the wallet deliberately uses the protocol in a way to keep your funds, your transparent funds, your non-private funds, uh, from mingling with transactions that could reveal that information, for example. So, yeah.
I just want to acknowledge that there's Zero Darts in the chat, and he said, "This is the best episode, maybe." And Joe said, "Vlad Loki gonna be the next roaring kitty for Zcash." I like the coin.
Are these messages on your Zcash wallet, or are they on?
No, I'm gonna get started with that because I got a
Yeah,
bunch of
do
them, and
that.
I
Do
feel
that.
like the people are pressuring me at this point to read them out loud. The question that goes first is, where does Sean get his smartness?
So I know it's starting to turn into a little meme that I'm smart, and that's whatever. But I'm definitely not smart. I know that for sure because whenever I'm in a room with other Zcashers, I'm like the dumbest person in the room by far. So I'm not smart, which it's okay. I don't care. That it doesn't matter to me. It's just I think I probably overcompensate by working a lot harder, or I try to anyway. Um, that's the only way yeah, exactly. I just have to overcompensate for it and think about this stuff all the time. My memory is not nearly as good as a lot of other people that I work with, whether it be other engineers and cryptographers at ECC or just like Zuko or whoever else in the project. Just they live and breathe this stuff in a different way than I do. Um, yeah, I'm not smart.
Someone said, no question here, just wanted to say the dance was amazing. Heart emoji. Okay, next one says, where do you get your ideas from? Double question mark.
uh, well, it's funny because actually everything I've ever done that's been like technically interesting or novel in the Zcash project has all been scale related. If you squint a little, um, improving the performance of the ZK SNARKs, anything that I would have done that you could even say was novel or interesting or like clever would be in service of making those perform better so they could run on phones, or improving the performance or scalability of the trusted setups, which we needed to do in order to actually run them and make them more trustworthy until we got rid of them. The thing with Halo, the idea was, how do we make recursive proofs? Yes, without a trusted setup, but part of the reason why we were trying to do it without a trusted setup was because there's this sort of relationship between cryptographic assumptions that are really strong, that rely on bilinear maps and pairing friendly elliptic curves and stuff, and also structured reference strings, these things that the trusted setups are used to create. And I was trying to avoid the really expensive things to build recursive proofs that required these trusted setups almost just by association, and it ended up getting rid of trusted setups. But that was motivated entirely by performance at first. I would have actually been totally happy with Halo at first if it didn't solve the trusted setup problem for recursive proofs. But the fact that it did was really, really awesome. Tachyon obviously is a scale performance thing. So if there's anything novel I came up with that, then that's also entirely motivated by, inspired by making Zcash scale, making it more performant in one way or another, I think. So that's my inspiration. So bottlenecks are an inspiration for sure.
Someone sent an amount that spells leet, so it's 0.0001337 ZEK, and he published this quote from Oscar Wilde, The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is related to privacy, and I guess I do have to read it. It says, "The commonest thing is delightful if one only hides it. When I leave town, now I never tell my people where I am going. If I did, I would lose all my pleasure. It is a silly habit, I dare say, but somehow it seems to bring a great deal of romance into one's life."
Thanks, chat.
Someone else said, "Read out aloud, Zmiao." There you go.
Have you had to filter out any comments yet?
No, I haven't.
Been positive. That's wonderful. Excellent. Thank you, Zcash community.
There's someone called Arjun Hemani, I think. Arjun Kemani, maybe.
That's right.
He says, "When does Sean solve aging and death?"
I'm gonna leave that to other people. That is I could squint a little and maybe come up with an argument that that's a scaling bottleneck too. By the way, he is one of the authors of this book that I have on my whiteboard, which I don't even have the book and I haven't read it yet, but I have it coming. But I just wanted to plug it. Lords of the Cosmos.
So Arjun Kemani, what's the name of the book?
Lords of the Cosmos.
Lords of the Cosmos.
From Stasis to Stars.
There's another question that says, "What does Zcash network state mean to you?"
Zcash network state? It means to me that there's people socializing and talking about Zcash, at least. I think there was some event in Singapore, which I didn't go to, that had people, and it was something like that, Zcash network state. There's this whole like philosophy surrounding like a new like I don't know how to describe it. It's Balaji's universe of exiting when the system isn't working, and building like permissionless societies or whatever the hell it is, and how Zcash plays a role in that. I don't know. I don't really follow that. I just know there's a lot of people socializing, talking about Zcash, and I just wanted to do math, so I stayed back and did math instead. So hopefully that answers the questions. It probably doesn't.
That's a good question. That's a good answer to the question. And I do have another question which spawns some other question, because this guy sent 0. And this is possible. It is possible to send a 0 transaction, which only pays the transaction fee. Yep. And I'm curious if, in the light of this conversation that we are having in Bitcoin about what is spam, is this considered to be spam in Zcash, where you send 0 and you only pay the transaction fee?
This is awesome. Here we go. This is cool. So in Zcash, at least theoretically, it may not be implemented now, but totally within the way the protocol works today, you don't really pay anything for transactions that haven't been spent yet. I mean, technically you do right now because it takes up blockchain space. But in a future design of it, the validators don't actually need to care about these things like that are analogous to UTXOs that are called notes or note commitments, really, in Zcash. Validators don't need to keep track of all of them like they do in Bitcoin. And so, I know in the Bitcoin world, the idea is that you want to prune the state so that if I spend some money and it's been 100 blocks or 1,000 blocks or whatever, the validators can just get rid of that, anticipating that there won't be a rollback. So they only have to keep like a 100 megabytes of state or whatever it is. And yeah, we don't really have that problem with the notes themselves. And so it doesn't matter to us really how much value is in a note. If it has 0 or not, dust isn't really a thing in our system. Ironically, it's actually the mechanism that we use to prevent you from double spending that consumes the resources. So it's the spends, in a sense, that cost us, not the newly created coins. It's the infrastructure, the mechanisms, and the cryptography used to prevent you from cheating and counterfeiting coins. That's the thing that adds extra state for the validators to keep track of. That's the main thing, or one of the main things that Tachyon addresses, is that state growth in that part of the protocol, because it blows up to a completely unmanageable size for even a small amount of transactions per second. So addressing that problem, it removes like the last asymptotic performance bottleneck in the actual cryptography in Zcash without compromising on the really, really strong privacy guarantees that the protocol provides.
Yeah, so now I do have to read the question that was addressed using a 0 amount of ZEC, which is, what time frame does Sean have in mind for Tachyon to succeed? And this was signed by Next is Crypto.
Yeah, so like our previous shielded protocol upgrades, like, well, even including our launch back in 2016, which was a marathon to get that finished, and we didn't have like millions and millions of dollars left over after we launched. We had almost nothing. So that launch, the launch of Sapling a couple years after that, the launch of Orchard 4 years after that, it's really hard to build these protocols and ship them when there's a lot you have to do. But we were able to go from conception and idea and cryptographic research phase to mainnet pretty quickly in a lot of cases, like 18 months or so. And in that span of time, like for example, for Sapling, we had to do trusted setups and stuff. We don't have to do those anymore, which is nice. So that cuts the lead time a lot significantly. And then also the way that I think we're going to be rolling features out in Zcash isn't going to be like in previous network upgrades where we have to ship the shielded transaction protocol for something like Tachyon, and it has to be used immediately. My goal over the next year is to get into mainnet a protocol that can be used and integrated into the wallets, which development will happen in parallel with that on the wallet side and the user-facing side to incorporate the changes, but they won't happen at the exact same time. So doing all the hard core cryptography and getting it shipped in the protocol so we can actually play with it and integrate it with the wallets in parallel, that stretches, like, users obviously have to upgrade their transactions and their wallets and their coins to move it over through the turnstile to the new pool. So the whole process is a very long process, but my goal is just to get the protocol integrated into Zcash mainnet next year, essentially. So that's my timeline. That's the only timeline I'm publicly willing to commit to currently.
I do want to ask you more about Tachyon, but I was thinking the approach to this interview should be rather chronological, so we'll get there. For those of you who want to learn more about Tachyon, we'll get there. There's someone who just said Zabubu, and I'm not sure what's supposed to mean. Is this gonna be like a meme?
There's some like thing that kids, like literally like elementary school people get, and then they open boxes with these little dolls or something like that. I forget what they're
No,
called.
they're not for
Labubu?
elementary school
Labubu?
kids. Trust me.
Oh no. Okay.
They're like the new Beanie Babies. Adults are trading them.
Oh no. That's okay. Either way, whatever people like. Yeah. I guess that's the new meme for Zcash.
I've
Zillionaires buying Zabubus.
I've received a very good question, which I was gonna ask myself if it wasn't addressed here. So back in 2013, we had this raging bull market in Bitcoin. A lot of people got involved, and a lot of so on one hand you had the suits and the VC investors who were like, yeah, we should put tokens on Bitcoin and we should do stuff with this. And that's how you got Counterparty and Omni, which was called Mastercoin. And then you got Ethereum. And that's like the financial side of it. It was called Bitcoin 2.0. But on the other side of the spectrum, you had a bunch of academic cryptographers who started paying attention and taking Bitcoin more seriously. And they said, well, we can make this more private with zero knowledge proofs. And Matthew Green, I think, was involved in both of these papers. The first one that was published was called Zerocoin. And the second one, which improved upon the model, was called Zerocash. And Zcash is basically the successor as an altcoin, because Zerocoin and Zerocash were soft fork proposals for Bitcoin meant to improve the privacy of Bitcoin. And someone is asking in this note, could you explain in simple language what is the main difference between Zerocash, today's Zcash, and Zerocoin, today's Firo? It used to be Zcoin before that, for shielded transactions.
Well, I don't know if Firo currently uses the same protocol that the same old Zerocoin protocol. I mean, they originally did. I don't know that much about that project. I actually don't know that much about Zerocoin. It was a very flawed proposal, and as the authors would admit, it had some major issues, and it wasn't practical. And it had, I don't know, it was a goofy protocol. I don't actually remember that much about how that protocol works. I know that what Zerocash did was it sort of threw snarks at the problem, whereas we had these sort of special purpose zero knowledge proofs in Zerocoin to handle the transfer mechanisms and statements that had to be made in those transactions. In Zerocash, it just said, okay, we'll just solve everything with a snark. So we'll have a circuit that does the whole statement, general purpose, and then we'll use these insane new cryptographic primitives that just come out and just became practical with Pinocchio and some successor papers just that year or the year after that. And it seemed like, oh, okay, cool. We have this like 600 byte at the time or something like that proof that could prove anything. So we'll just design the protocol around that and then go from there. I don't know that I don't want to get inside the authors' heads of Zerocoin and Zerocash. Personally, I would never have been optimistic. I don't about actually incorporating Zerocoin and Zerocash into Bitcoin. If you ever interacted with the Bitcoin developers back then, maybe they hadn't, and they were more optimistic. They were absolutely not going to ever add something like that, even back then. And certainly today, I mean, you can't even change a line of code in Bitcoin anymore without spending like years on it. So there's no way it was ever going to happen. So I don't know if they were ever seriously thinking that it was going to be incorporated into Bitcoin, or they were thinking this is a good way to pitch it to get our paper accepted into a conference or something. I don't know. I'm just speculating. Personally, just offhand, I'm not sure.
Honestly, I think it was a very serious offer that was taken into consideration. If you go back to Bitcoin Talk, it was the post by Greg Maxwell in the summer of 2013, where he came up with this concept of the CoinJoin in Bitcoin. And the context for the CoinJoin was that until we get Zerocoin or Zerocash, this is the second best thing we can actually get, like a decentralized mixer that is helping users get some privacy. And he also explained that it's not strong enough privacy and it's just something temporary, but it was the best we could get at the time. What's interesting is that it took, how long? 4 years or something until Samurai Wallet came around, and then another year for Wasabi Wallet to get published. And before that, the only serious implementation which never actually shipped in its fullest form was something called Dark Wallet, built by Amir Taki.
Yeah. See, when Greg says that, like, oh, until we get zero, I haven't read that post in a long time, if ever. So I'm not really sure what exactly he said in that, but I think he's always been really skeptical. Maybe he was talking about Zerocash, the protocol, but it was just a non-starter that it required at the time. These snarks. I think actually Greg Maxwell coined the term moon math. If you ever heard that term, at least that's what I've heard. Maybe it's not true, but I think he coined that term to make fun of the cryptographic assumptions, specifically, I believe, the knowledge of exponent assumption that the pairing friendly or the pairing friendly based elliptic curve based snarks that were coming out at the time depended on, which, yeah, I mean, I think is ridiculous to call that assumption moon math at this point. There's way more ridiculous assumptions and security models that people work with all the time in cryptography today and take it for granted, and that's totally fine. It was kind of a overly conservative thing, but I think around that time Greg Maxwell actually felt that way about the cryptography in these constructions, and so maybe he was bullish on long term on Zerocash, but I don't know that I don't know that he was actually totally okay with. It wasn't just a matter of it developing Zerocash; it was a matter of getting rid of those strong cryptographic assumptions, probably. I think.
Well, in the post
Especially
on
trusted
Bitcoin
setup.
Talk, he says, so he's actually referring to Zerocoin as a point of reference. And he says, how does this compare to Zerocoin? And he starts by saying, as a crypto and computer science geek, I'm super excited by Zerocoin. The technology behind it is fascinating and important. But as a Bitcoin user and developer, the promotion of it as the solution to improved privacy disappoints me. And then he explains why he doesn't like the limitations of Zerocoin. And then he says, above all, Zerocoin requires a soft forking change to the Bitcoin protocol, which all full nodes must adopt, which would commit Bitcoin to a particular version of the Zerocoin protocol. And this cannot happen fast, probably not within years, especially considering that there is so much potential for further refinement to the algorithm at lower costs.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean that's a pattern, by the way, you're going to see go in Bitcoin. Just naturally, there's going to be a lot of like these new interesting things with BitVM and all that kind of stuff, where they're going to get really close to shipping something and then realize, and then a new paper is going to come out and say, "Oh, I have a way to do it 10 times faster and with better trust assumptions." That they're never going to. It's going to take a long time before they feel comfortable shipping anything like that. Knowing that around the corner is like a breakthrough that makes it much more efficient or something like that. I'd be worried personally, just as an engineer, implementing something knowing that any day now on ePrint there's going to be just something that drops that makes everything I'm working on and getting audited and trying to ship just totally obsolete. That would scare the crap out of me. I wouldn't be motivated at all. If you're putting those kinds of constraints on your protocol, which Bitcoin people do, that have to do, then it's a lot harder to execute and ship quickly. In Zcash, we don't care about that as much because we're willing to take what we have that we know works and change the protocol completely to implement it and integrate it as fast as we can, and as fast as we can safely. And so we move a lot faster, and we're a lot less scared of new papers coming around and obsoleting what we're doing. We try to be anyway. And yeah.
You're making my work very easy right now because I do have to plug some sponsors. And one of them is Citrea, which is working with BitVM. And they're trying to build this ZK rollup that's going to bring Ethereum features on top of Bitcoin as a layer 2. And they are working with BitVM version 2, as far as I know. And then there's also BitVM version 3 and garbled circuits, something that their competition, which is called Alpen Labs, they came up with this. And the difference between the two of them is that Citrea is going to launch this year, and they are just content with having something that's good enough for now, and then they can upgrade. While Alpen has this approach where they're pursuing to build the best version of it that they possibly can, but there's always this risk that there's another paper coming out, and then they have to redesign their system from scratch. And I don't know, it's just two different approaches. Citrea, you can actually test it today. The URL is citrea.xyz. And I think the end goal for that is to tap into the liquidity that's available on Ethereum right now for wrapped Bitcoin, to bring it to a layer which is inheriting the security guarantees of the Bitcoin network, and is also potentially more expressive or closer to the hearts of Bitcoiners. So check out Citrea, it's citrea.xyz, and you can download the software to run it on the Bitcoin testnet today. I think they're going to be launching within a couple of months. And then there's also Layer 2 Labs, which has this ZSide drive chain. And they are basically building according to the philosophy of bringing all the interesting features from altcoins to Bitcoin on a sidechain. And not just the federation like Blockstream decided that they're happy to have, but as a proper two-way peg sidechain, but secured by the miners. And they have their software ready. I think they have the latest version of Ethereum, the latest version of Zcash, the latest version of Namecoin, if you want to do serious asset kind of stuff, some prediction market, and also big block version of the Bitcoin network, which allows a lot of transaction throughput and is prunable. You can test the software today. It does require a soft fork, unlike Citrea. So in order to have drive chains, we would need BIP 300. And the software works on the Bitcoin Signet. You can download it at layer2labs.com/download. Layer 2 is with letters, so it's layertwolabs.com. And check it out. I think it's really exciting. I think it's my favorite approach to Bitcoin maximalism. And it's actually about bringing more use cases and more utility to the existing 21 million coins. And I'm hopeful that this is going to come true one day. But for the time being, when I look at the level of Bitcoin debate and discourse, it's a bit discouraging, to say the least. But it's good to be optimistic. It's good to have some kind of purpose and goal. And let me plug one more ad, and then we can get to the next question. This is about Bitcoin.com news, which has rebranded over the last year. They're no longer the green Bitcoin website, which promotes Bitcoin Cash and says that BTC is slower and more expensive. They moved on with the trends of the market, and now it's orange. And they have news from across the entire industry, which I think are more balanced than Bitcoin Magazine or CoinDesk, where I think Bitcoin Magazine is too political and biased at it while they're at it. And CoinDesk is sort of oriented towards institutions. They're not about small projects, and they don't report on some stuff. And I think Bitcoin.com news is more open to some community projects and some op-eds, which I think are interesting, and they cover parts of the world you usually don't hear about. And they also have news about Zcash. If you type Zcash into the search box on news.bitcoin.com, you're gonna find out that the newest article says Zcash leads the charge. Double-digit gainers ignite 4.12 trillion crypto rally. So there are news about Zcash. You can check them out on bitcoin.com news. And thanks to these sponsors for making this possible. Now, the next question is more of a suggestion or order. I don't know how I should take this. This person says, "Sell him my laptop, please." And it's signed by Peter Todd. And I'm sure that this is not Peter Todd. And he's talking about one of the 6 computers that was used during the first Zcash ceremony, which, if I'm not mistaken, was called the Sprout. And I have
Yeah.
this.
Yep. There you go. Nice. You know, what's funny is that there was a time when I would have considered buying that in a panic and like desperation. There's this funny side story. I don't know how this plays into the questions you wanted to ask, but there's this funny side story that's kind of an untold story of the inflation bug and the fix in Zcash. Basically, what happened was in Zcash is we had this bug where the ceremony had produced a transcript that you needed to verify in order to see that the ceremony even took place at all. And what the transcript was, more or less, is it's a concatenation of all the contents of those DVDs. So those 6 DVDs that you have in that box form little slices in that transcript file. And it turns out that there was a mistake in the cryptographic protocol in the SNARK itself, which said to produce these elements during the setup, during the setup phase of the ceremony, or during the setup phase of the SNARK. And those were left in the transcript, even though they weren't used, and they shouldn't have been used at all in the protocol itself. And in fact, if you had access to those elements, essentially of the transcript, then you could create counterfeit Zcash. So we had launched Zcash unknowingly with this mistake that you could only exploit if you had access to that transcript. And I can go over the whole story, and there's of course there's a lot of you know, discussions about it. There's like a Radiolab episode and a bunch of other stuff. But after it was discovered, we had this transcript publicly. So what we did was we just deleted it publicly because you needed to use it to exploit. And then we had to think about what's our plan to remediate. And so we came up with a plan, which I can go over. But at one point, we did have a copy of the transcript. I had a copy in my house. And we decided as a team, okay, well, we can't find this anywhere else on the internet because it was so big that nobody else really downloaded and stored a mirror of it anywhere. And I couldn't think of anyone who would have a copy. And it turns out no one did. No one else did that I know of. So I had probably the only copy of this thing. And so I encrypted it with a key and gave it to Zuko. That way we would still have custody of it, but you'd have to like get to Zuko and to me in order to get to this transcript. And we debated for a long time what to do with it. In parallel, if you wanted to exploit the trusted setup, the ceremony, you'd have to get these DVDs because the transcript is just a concatenation of them. And the DVDs that you have in that box, actually one of them, I forget if it's the D DVD or the F one, I forget, but one of those contains the data in it that lets you create counterfeit sprout funds in the original version of the protocol. And so when we ended up I think it's probably disk D, probably, if I remember correctly, but either that one or disk F, I'm not sure. And it only happens to be in those DVDs, which is really weird. And so we actually had this copy of this transcript for a long time and decided to delete it, which was a controversial thing, but we decided to delete it on our end. And so after we did fix it in Zcash, we had to get the transcript back because there were people asking, where's the transcript? Because you needed it in order to see the ceremony work. And so we really did want to produce it if we could. It wouldn't be the end of the world if we couldn't, but if we could produce the transcript and we could show people, okay, here's the proof the ceremony took place, even though there was this bug in it, for a couple reasons. And so after we fixed the bug, and what I started doing is going around and trying to find out how am I going to reconstruct this transcript? And in order to do that, I needed all these DVDs from all the participants in order to reconstruct it. And Peter Todd was not going to help if we had messaged him. I think Zuko even tried to message him, hey, would you mind sending us a copy of your DVDs that you had?" And Peter Todd's like, "Ha ha, yeah, right. I'm not going to help you guys out," or something like that. I forget what he said, but he wasn't interested in that, which we expected. And there were some other DVDs that we had copies of because for accidental reasons, or because they were uploaded by participants in the ceremony. So we could get copies of that, and it's like putting together this puzzle. And you had to have every piece to make it work, so that you could reconstruct it. And if you don't have all the pieces, you're screwed. And we just got so lucky that this videographer who had been recording some of our early ceremony stuff happened to have downloaded some of the DVDs from that we needed in order to reconstitute the transcript. Now, some of the files they downloaded were corrupted, and so we talked to him, and I was really worried that the file that we needed, the last one that I couldn't reconstruct entirely, I wouldn't have been able to get a hold of it. But it turned out it worked, and I didn't need Peter Todd's help to reconstruct the transcript, and we could post it publicly. So it was this kind of crazy little story that nobody really would care about something like that, but we really cared about things like that. Being able to say that, hey, this is what happened, and be able to prove that it happened. That little tiny detail in the story needed to be totally solid, and I spent months trying to think about how to solve that problem.
Yeah, I do agree that this is an artifact and maybe it belongs in a museum. And someone actually reached out to me. His name is Shielded Mark on Twitter. And he asked for more information about this to document, basically to put more information in an article. And he said he's also working with some people who deal with art. And if I get this appraised, I can potentially donate this to a museum and get a tax deduction or something out of it. But I can't. That's the funny part, because I'm not a US citizen. And I'm not aware of any museum here that can potentially accept this as an artifact. I don't think they care at all about Zcash. And I think the only solution to get this in a museum is to sell it to someone who wants to get a tax cut. So someone's going to buy this from me and donate it to a museum. And then if they sell coins during the bull market, they're going to be able to not pay tax.
Well, I'm not going to be a speculator, so I'm not going to buy it from you. I'm not interested.
No, it's fine. It's just 10,000 ZC.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, and I said it's 10,000 when the price was like $70, and now it's $210.
Yeah, you got to stick with it.
It's a good question whether or not I should use Zcash as a unit of account, or it should be denominated in dollars.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, interesting story. Like this was such an interesting cypherpunk experiment to have this ceremony of 6 people. There was also Edward Snowden. There was the guy from Coin Center, David Van Valkenburg. Is it David? Peter Van
Valkenburg. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. He's great. But, yeah.
There was also Zuko and his brother. And who else? Peter Todd.
Wow, actually, I don't remember if Zuko's brother was one of the participants.
Bryce.
Bryce is Zuko's name, but yeah, I don't know if so. I know Zuko, Peter Todd, Edward Snowden, NCC Group. Was Andrew Miller a participant too? I think so. Yeah, I forget what the 6th one is. Wow, my memory is going. I can't remember exactly. I know we could find it somewhere. Andrew Miller, Derek Hinch, Peter Todd. Yeah, Andrew Miller, Peter Van Valkenburg, pseudonym John Dobberton, which was Edward Snowden. Zuko, Derek Hinch was a engineer, researcher, or whatever, security person at NCC Group, and then Peter Todd. Those were the 6 that were in the original ceremony.
I'm actually curious how many of these devices that they used are still available.
I'm not sure. I know that some of them got destroyed in elaborate ways. It was totally up to the participants. We thought of like we didn't want to tell the participants what to do with the hardware afterward. So and in general, we actually just didn't want to tell them to do anything in particular more so than they needed to in order to participate, so that they could, if they chose, to do unpredictable things that would prevent an adversary from being able to compromise whatever they were doing, or make it unpredictable. Um, so yeah, so those are the 6 that participated. Actually, Edward Snowden, I didn't know that Edward Snowden was participating. I knew that 3 of them were pseudonyms, and so I had no idea. Actually, I don't even remember who picked it. Probably Zuko, who picked the participants there. But so I was sort of the MC of the ceremony. So I was running the coordination server that handled intercepted all the communication between the participants and did some of the math in between steps that made the ceremony function. And so yeah, I was not aware of who all the participants were. And there's this funny moment where after the ceremony was done, I had a group chat with some of my roommates at the time, and they had sent some, they had been talking, and I got this message that sounded like someone from like an army base was talking about something. I forget what it was. So I responded to my roommates with that stupid like Navy SEAL meme, that thing off 4chan. I forget how the meme goes. Anyway, who do you think you're talking to, you little bitch, or whatever? That stupid meme. Thinking it was talking to my roommates, but I was mischanning. It was actually to the ceremony group chat, and I think it was Derek Hinch that was posting something, because he's like this really hardcore security person. So he was talking in this really robotic, high security, high stress kind of language that I had misinterpreted. And the next day I saw Zuko, and I was kind of holding my head. I'm like, God, I'm sorry. He's like, yeah, what was that? And I'm like, yeah, I thought it was my roommates. I got the wrong channel. But it turns out I posted the stupid meme and all that. I posted it in a chat with Edward Snowden. So when I found out it was Edward Snowden much later, I was like, oh crap. That's embarrassing. But,
That's a funny story. And to be honest, it was such a cool experiment. And afterwards, Peter Todd spent like a year going to conferences speaking about, I think the title of his presentation was Privacy Theater or Security Theater. And he was also calling you guys dishonest and said that the ceremony was useless and it did not accomplish what it was set to do.
oh, he hated it. Yeah, he hated the whole thing. I think what happened probably is that he got and I really appreciate that he participated, but from his perspective, it didn't it lended legitimacy to Zcash that he didn't want to lend, and he probably didn't realize that at the time. And then he had to like go back and kind of go on a apology tour, sort of, amongst the Bitcoin people to for having participated in the ceremony. I think it was valuable that he was part of it, and then he was very antagonistic and negative toward it, and he was really skeptical of it. He was coming up with ways that it didn't work, like these ridiculous, I think, oh, the Rust compiler could have been backdoored kind of things, whatever. It's really funny. I think it was valuable he participated. I know he probably regrets it, but whatever.
I guess that's why he sold this laptop for $1,000, and I was able to pick it up. And at the time, I think it was past the NFT mania where everyone was obsessed with collectibles, and I was thinking, oh, this is so cool. And I haven't opened it until I had my interview with Zuko, so I kept it in the box, sealed.
Yeah, that's cool. I thought you just were really disciplined, and he didn't want to open it up for a long time. I guess you were, so that's pretty cool.
I was saving it for a YouTube video, and I never had time to actually do it properly. Like I would need someone to hold the camera and do close-ups and make it look professional.
Yeah.
And I was waiting for the right moment to do this, and then when I realized I was gonna interview Zuko, I said to myself, "Oh, maybe this is the right time.
Yep.
Maybe having the right person to explain the context of this and tell stories about what happened is actually a much better setting than just me reading a bunch of articles and listening to that radio show or whatever it was,
Radio
and
Lab.
then coming up with just a summary of that."
Yep.
But to be honest, if I did a YouTube video, maybe it could get more views than a 6-hour interview. But I digress. Those who have watched the 6-hour interview, I have a lot more respect for them.
Yep.
What else was I gonna say? Oh yeah, last year I was at a conference and I interviewed Peter Todd, and I've asked him for the names of free altcoins which he thinks are legit and are not shitcoins. And he named Litecoin, Monero, and Zcash. And I've actually asked him, like, hey, did you just name Zcash after all the history that you have with them? And he said, yeah, but the technology is actually interesting and they have made great progress. So
Yeah,
it was
for
good to
sure.
see that he acknowledged that his opinions can change and he's paying attention to the new stuff. Maybe it was really him who sent me this message.
maybe it was that. Yeah, I think Peter Todd. There's a lot of people who have really strong opinions, and maybe they come across really negative and hurtful at times towards Zcash. But especially if they're technologists, they appreciate the merit of the cryptography. And I think that a lot of these characters that are maybe negative at times, I think you'll find that at the very least they're very sincere people. Like I think Peter Todd's a very sincere person, even if I don't. Or most of the time he's sincere anyway. I don't know him that well, but and other characters like for example Luke, who I know is really controversial. Luke Dashier is really controversial in the Bitcoin space, especially right now. Um, I've never had a pleasant interaction with him, but if you kind of step back and just think of all these people as characters, and you don't take it too personally, and you kind of hear about these people indirectly from other people, you realize, oh, actually, these people are very authentic. They're sincere about what they mean usually, and it's a healthier attitude that you can carry with you in life, I think. I guess when I like years ago with Luke in particular, I remember this a long time ago that the only time I ever really talked to him was when I was building something for Bitcoin for a friend, and I needed to use the Bitcoin RPC in some way that essentially admitted that in some situations a from address exists in Bitcoin. Of course, from a conceptual perspective and definitely from a protocols perspective, there isn't such a concept as a from address, even though in some situations you can interpret a transaction as having a from address in some limited cases if you feel like it. And that's how a lot of people who use cryptocurrencies can often think that there is a money's moving from this address to another address. On a technical level, that's not exactly what's taking place. But anyway, whatever I was building, it sort of it tacitly admitted that these from addresses could exist or could be, you could consider them existing. And Luke Jr. or Luke Dashier did not want me to build whatever I was building, and did not want to help. That didn't want anyone else to help me build it because he was emphatically opposed to from addresses. So I'm on this IRC channel trying to get help. Like, why can't I use the RPC to get this information? He's like, no, there's no such thing as a from address. Sorry. I'm like, okay, well, I didn't ask you. I was asking other people. Like, you know, I'd want someone else's help and advice. And he's just interfering with me. And I got all mad at him or whatever. And Greg Maxwell messaged me and said, hey, don't be such a jerk to Luke. Why are you being such a jerk to him? And I was like, oh, I'm really sorry, because I was really respected Greg Maxwell. And I was like, oh, I'm really sorry about that, whatever. It's funny, years later, I don't feel exactly the same about all the characters involved. But I know that I at the time I really thought Luke was a really annoying and antagonistic person, but I don't care about that anymore. He might think I'm a horrible person, a scammer, or whatever he would say about me. I probably doesn't even know who I am. Maybe if he does, I don't think he cares. But uh, I genuinely think that he would probably save my life if it didn't risk his own life. He would save my life if he saw me like drowning on the side of the road or something. I think he, like, from what I've heard about him, he actually seems like a good person, even though I don't agree with him about all his technical decisions. And um, I'm not a Knots fan. I'm not a his opinions on like the op return stuff and all the rest of that. Although I don't really follow it that much, I'm not really on his side on that, and I have no reason to like defend him at all. But from what I've heard, he's actually a really sincere and honest person. So it helps to keep in mind that all these people are just characters. Just think of them as characters and don't take it too personally.
It took me a long time to understand this, that Twitter is not real life. It's so
Yeah.
obvious in hindsight, but you take these people seriously and you think that they really mean what they're saying, and then you stumble upon this cult which is saying, well, I never sold a single Bitcoin. I'm going to pass this on to my grandchildren and blah, blah, blah. And then you meet them at conferences in person and you see them wearing fancy watches and bragging about the stuff that they have. And you're like, so how did you get this if you never sold a single Bitcoin? And they wink at you or they just laugh. Like, okay, that was never real.
Yeah.
There's another message that I got. It says, when you get to the deep dive on Tachyon, can Sean please explain how moving the secret off-chain will retain the existing level privacy? Where will the secret be stored? How can we be sure it will stay private?
Good, very good questions. I can let's add that to the stack somewhere. Let's push it onto the
Is there
stack.
any way I can bookmark this? I can add a note to it, so I can write important add note. Okay, so I'll get back to this. On the topic of the ceremony, which we discussed, a lot of people remember Zcash as the network that had to fix an inflation bug. And a lot of Bitcoiners say they stopped paying attention to Zcash in that moment when they realized that, okay, after this ceremony and all of this complex setup, there could still be an inflation bug. And Monero people still use this against Zcash. They say, well, maybe that there was an exploit in the inflation bug. How can you be sure? And
Right.
there's this mechanism that's called a turnstile, which I'm not sure I understand very well, but I would be happy if you could explain what really happened and how we can be sure that the supply of Zcash is the one that we see.
Yeah. So the way that shielded transactions are added to Zcash in the protocol is we have the standard Bitcoin style transactions, and then we have these other parts of the transactions that can interact with what we call a shielded pool, which is where all the shielded money exists. And you can move your money from the transparent world of the Bitcoin world into these shielded pools. And when you're doing shielded transactions, everything about the transaction is private, like completely private. So you can't actually tell the difference really between two arbitrary shielded transactions. They actually look like just random. You can't distinguish between the two. In fact, that's how we prove that it's secure. And that's how we prove that it's private, this indistinguishability property. So money can go in the pool, can come out of the pool, and we can keep track at the boundary of how much has gone in and how much has gone out. Now, obviously, if more goes out of the pool than came in, then there must have been an inflation bug. And inflation bugs can exist anywhere in a protocol, but if they exist inside the shielded pool, then it's because the cryptography was broken, quantum computer showed up, there was a counterfeiting bug in the circuit, there was a ceremony bug, like the one that actually there was a bug, and somebody exploited it, obviously, and in that case, and then it became obvious to everyone when they tried to take more money out, or when not when they did, or not when they tried to take all the money out, but when other people who still had money in that pool tried to take all of their money out that they had sitting in there. And so for years and years and years and years now, God, how many years has it been? Like 7 years. The Sprout pool has been sitting there waiting for somebody to take the rest of their funds out, and it's dwindled down over time, and it's sort of asymptoted at like, I don't know, 20,000 or something. Zach is sitting there, and if there was anyone who had, especially with the price being lower a lot during most of this time, if there was anyone that had even a slightly significant amount of funds in the Sprout pool during any of that time and wanted to take it out, sell it, or do whatever, they would have triggered this public uh, failure of the turnstile. It would have caused a consensus fault or whatever. It would. There's actually an actual mechanism that would alert everyone that this happened. There's an error, and so everyone would know that more money came out of Sprout than went in, no matter how the cryptography works, no matter if the setup was working or not working. And this is the case for all of our shielded pools. And the shielded pools are in isolation. So you can't just move money from Sprout to the new protocols that use the more advanced trusted setups, or to the new protocol that everyone's using now, which is Orchard, which doesn't have a trusted setup. You can't move between these without going through that turnstile, without making the value public temporarily in order to keep this keep the amounts that went in and out of each pool public knowledge, so that this accounting can actually be enforced. So that's how we know. We know with some certainty that it would be easy, that it would have been difficult for this to be exploited at any time in Zcash's history without us knowing that this turnstile would have been violated at some point. And it would have been it would have been easy for that condition to be triggered. Anyone could trigger it if they just had money in Sprout. So somebody, or many people, have some Sprout funds that they just forgot about or whatever, but not very many. And so if there was counterfeiting, what is the worst that could have happened? Well, 20,000 ZEC was counterfeit. And it just so happens that the amount of funds that were left in the pool, inadvertently or not, maybe on purpose, I don't know, by the people who haven't taken their money out and who didn't counterfeit, is just slightly higher than whatever was actually counterfeit at any given time. And for years, we haven't even had the ability for you to be able to put money into Sprout. I mean, we stopped at, like, I don't know how many, like 5 years ago or something like that, 4 or 5 years ago, you couldn't add money into that pool anymore. So there's no way it was exploited, I think. And if it was, then there's a cap on the impact that it has on the rest of the network. And so that's my answer. Is I'm not too worried about that protocol. I don't think anyone's seriously engaging in speculation over whether that bug was exploited can argue that, if they're being honest, can argue that it was exploited in any significant way, if at all. Yeah, that's my personal thinking. If somebody's coming around saying, "Oh, how do we know?" or whatever, depending on how they're phrasing it, I would be inclined to assume that they're being disingenuous with all that evidence.
Right, so worst case scenario, there were 20,000 ZEC that were counterfeit.
Yeah, I mean, like, worst case scenario.
But
I don't know
have
the
to
exact
assume
amount.
that if someone had access to an inflation bug, they would do something much worse than that.
That's a good question. What would they do? What would you? It's not a really easy answer. Like, what would you do if you had that? If you were an evildoer and you wanted to make as much money as possible, how would you exploit a counterfeiting bug in a shielded pool, knowing that if you exploit it now, you'll probably, and it's discovered and somebody else exploit. You don't know if other people are going to exploit it. You don't know when it's going to be discovered. You don't know what the price is going to be like in 10 years. Like, what's the price now versus what it was when the bug was out versus what it was 4 years ago or 3 months ago. This totally affects what an adversary would choose to do in order to maximize how much they could stand to benefit or profit from exploiting the vulnerability. It's not clear to me that there's there's any solid strategy besides exploit it as fast as possible and dump the coins. I'd be open to discussion over what the best way to do that is, but then again, I've been trying to block that kind of thinking out of my memory, because what's at stake is like this thing I worked really hard on, would have its credibility in shambles if that were to have happened at all. And so I really hate even speculating over that sort of thing. It's not very motivational. I'll let other people speculate, but I don't think there's any real realistic scenario where somebody is exploiting the bug, and they leave those funds sitting in the sprout pool for that long strategically. As it just seems ridiculous, I think.
Yeah, and for context, when there was the inflation bug in Bitcoin back in 2010, they mined 184 billion BTC, and Satoshi fixed it. But the point is that when someone is actually malevolent, they're trying to print a ridiculous amount of money to destroy the credibility of the system.
Definitely. Well, in that case, I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly all the details of that bug, but I think it was glaringly obvious that something was exploited because of it. Oh, it had to overflow, so it had to be a large amount of money, maybe. I forget. But of course, if you're counterfeiting in a shielded pool, the amount that you counterfeit is not public, right? So we couldn't possibly know what actual strategy a counterfeiter in particular would take.
Yeah. There's another question. What kind of music do you listen to, and what is the model of those Sennheisers?
Oh, these are HD 800s. I don't know if they still sell these or not. What kind of music do I listen to? Is that what they asked?
Yeah.
Oh, God. Just I'm not too strict on what kind of music. Electronic music of a wide variety. I hate talking about the music I listen to because nobody likes my music, so I just keep it to myself usually. But
Someone says that he is monitoring the situation, and he is some kind of emoji while the stream is going. I don't know what this emoji is. Trying to understand.
if they're monitoring the situation, it's probably Mert. That's what he's good at doing.
Your thoughts on the 1559 implementation? Why do tokens that are burned have to be reintroduced? Why can't they be left burned? Will not this change the supply schedule?
No, it doesn't change. I mean, one of
for context, what is the 1559
so
implementation?
yeah, so we have this. We have to introduce a fee market in Zcash, long term. Even if our protocols probably scales, probably we'd still want a fee market of some kind, because there's always going to be constraints, or at least over the next many years, we're going to have bandwidth constraints and things like that in the protocol. So we're going to need a fee market that's private. We don't have one of those right now in Zcash. So the way to do that usually is to adjust the base fee that everybody needs to pay, or the max, like the required fee for the transactions. Adjust it on a per block basis, potentially based on the usage of the amount of transactions that are taking place currently, to adjust to usage dynamically. And to do that privately, you have to apply the same rule to everyone. Again, it's one of those things with privacy. You have to do your best to make it so that everyone's transactions are as indistinguishable from everyone else's. So having a fee market and making that property hold requires you to do things like this. And so the question was about adding that, and then why. So there is a mechanism in the proposed fee market for Bitcoin, or for Zcash, where the coins, part of the coins actually get burned, or something happens to them that doesn't allow the miners that mine the blocks to actually take them as fees. And the reason for that is that the miners in it are have influence over the actual number of transactions that are included in a block. So they're the adversary. So you have to imagine a possibility where they might try to manipulate the fees to increase fees in order to benefit themselves. So to prevent that, you add some mechanism that would take some of the fees and take them away from the miners, so that if they were trying to manipulate it, they would be punished. They would be spending their own coins to it and to do so. Now, the question of the supply cap, I mean, in the Zcash community, I'm pretty sure 99.9999% of everyone in the Zcash community is strongly in favor of maintaining a strict maximum supply cap of 21 million coins. And that's just like, it's in our DNA for a project. It's something we set out from the beginning to enforce. But the question of what happens to coins when they get burned, another question is what happens to coins in the sprout pool? We have the sprout pool we were just talking about, where there's 20,000 or some odd coins sitting in that pool. What if nobody claims those coins? Do they just get burned too, so that no one ever accesses them again? Because we're not going to keep Sprout around forever. I mean, 20 years, if we have Sprout around, that's ridiculous. So we're going to get rid of it someday. So what happens to those coins? Well, is it really a violation of? It's not a violation of the supply cap if the coins are recycled. It's not really a violation of the inflation rate or the issuance schedule, because we're not issuing new coins. We're just taking coins that were already issued and using some mechanism to redistribute them. So it is a good question. I don't really have strong opinions on what should be done with the coins. I suppose you could burn them, but I don't know. I don't think about those kind of market incentives things very often. Something needs to be done where the coins are taken away from the miners. That's for sure. So.
Right. So are you implying that the network is going to transition to proof of stake?
That's a orthogonal, I think. The fee market thing is something that could be added with or without proof of stake. I think proof of stake possibly will help a lot with solving certain kinds of problems, like certain bottlenecks in our protocol, time to finality, things like that, and arguably, depending on who you talk to, security improvements in the consensus protocol. So, and I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for adding proof of stake right now. The community sort of expects that we're going to make a lot of progress doing that. So that's another thing that I'm like, I don't think too much about that stuff. I have enough on my own plate. But there's a lot of enthusiasm and work being done right now by Shielded Labs to build and also propose to the Zcash community concrete hybrid proof of stake, proof of work consensus change in Zcash that the community could consider for inclusion in the protocol. Hopefully next year sometime. That'll be cool.
So why is it necessary to burn the fees? Is this a way to also improve the privacy in some way? Because if you're a sophisticated attacker, you can basically look at the amount of fees being paid for transactions and backtrack from there to make assumptions.
No. It's the point of you don't have to burn all the fees. You burn some portion of them, so that the miners, if they include a lot of transactions in their blocks in order to manipulate the metric that's used to determine what the fee rate changes are, which is some deterministic function of the number of transactions that are in the block or something like that, they can manipulate that metric by creating their own transactions that send money to themselves and paying a fee. Now, in the absence of any burning, they could just send the money back to themselves via the fee mechanism, because they're mining their own transactions in their own block. So they can manipulate the actual fee market. They have influence over it, which earns them more in fees. So that creates a bad incentive structure for the fee market. So to discourage that, you just make it so that some of the fees are not given to the miner of the block, because if you did, they have some incentive to manipulate it. Some of them are burned, and some significant portion of them are either burned or taken away in some mechanism away from the miner, so that they're not incentivized to manipulate the fee market, basically, because they would be burning or giving their own coin in this attacker scenario. They'd be giving their own coins away to
Some
to the network.
Something that Monero people usually point out to is the fact that Via BTC owns right now 73% of the hash rate. And they say that this is an attack vector. The network can become insecure, get 51% attacked by Via BTC. And the next two pools are two miners with 6%, Antpool with 2.8, Supernova with 0.4, Mining Dutch with 1.4. And there's also an unknown portion of the hash rate, which is 15.5%. So, to which extent is this a concern? And what is the development team doing to mitigate this?
So, like the developers and people working on Zcash have a lot of wear a lot of different hats, and my hat's like the crypto hat, and a lot of these things that have to do with consensus mechanisms and fee markets and security and things of those kind of portions of the protocol, I don't think about too much. So I'm only just totally speculating based on my thinking, but I consider it a problem, but I also consider it a problem in Bitcoin too, that there's just a few pools. I mean, the fact that there's a few pools in Bitcoin is mainly a manufactured appearance, a security theater. Speaking of security theater, like that's just BS, basically. Those pools, if they felt like there was any threat to the price of Zcash or the price of Bitcoin, they would just divest some of their hash power somehow to other pools, even artificially, even just to put on appearances if they had to. So that's just like there's a serious centralization problem with the pools in Bitcoin. There's a very serious one in Zcash as well. That needs to be fixed, and that's another reason why the work on Crosslink is exciting a lot of people in the community, because that helps at least to alleviate the concerns a little bit by adding another mechanism, because it's a hybrid proof of work, proof of stake protocol, another mechanism to secure the protocol, the consensus protocol. That might work. Now in Zcash and in Bitcoin, and unlike in like Monero, for example, our proof of work is generally almost entirely mined using ASIC devices. So the people mining have like this long-term incentive in the value of their hardware that they invested in. And they're trying to get a return on. And if they were to attempt to attack us or Bitcoin, they would be nuking their hardware, right? Because the Zcash developers would just say, okay, well, you're destroying the network, so we're just going to change the proof of work, or we're going to switch to proof of stake, or whatever we'll do. If we have to treat it as an emergency, an existential crisis for the network, then that's what we'll do for sure, absolutely. So the miners know, the pools know this, and so to the extent that they I don't think that they would want to willingly participate in something that obviously threatened this the like liveness of the network, or the behavior of the network, or doing anything that would cause the price to go down or anything like that. They just want to do their job as pools and hope that they get as much fees as they can from the miners, and the miners think the same way about trying to get a return on the investment in the hardware. So the other thing is that in our protocol, and like in Bitcoin, we're less concerned about censorship because shielded transactions again are kind of indistinguishable from each other. So you can't really target certain users of shielded transactions while not targeting all of them, which is a important property, I think, that's undervalued in Zcash.
Yeah, that's also something which is very relevant for the privacy conversation in Bitcoin, because people say, well, we don't want privacy because it's going to get delisted from exchanges and maybe the number will stop going up and whatever. And then it's going to be back to being presented in the media as this criminal coin because you can hide stuff. But in reality, if you want the system to be censorship resistant, you do need to make transactions indistinguishable from each other. And for as long as there is this social layer where you can say, well, I don't like where this coin is coming from, and it's associated with this, I don't know, maybe it comes from a Silk Road wallet, maybe it comes from North Korea or whatever.
Right.
There's gonna be a filtering system, and some nodes will refuse to relay the transaction, some miners will refuse to mine the transaction. But the reason why this works is not technical, but it has to do with game theory and the fact that there's an incentive for someone to mine that transaction. It's the reason why we say that Bitcoin is both censorship resistant and somewhat permissionless. But these guarantees, which are provided by game theory, may not be enough. Incentives are not always the only reason. Of course, as long as there's at least one mining pool that's outside of these sanctioned regions and is free to mine all transactions, this is not much of a concern. But by default, the system should not allow people to discriminate. And it's something that I like to tell Bitcoin people when they say, well, we don't need privacy on the base layer, we should have it on second layers or whatever. But this is exactly why you should have privacy on the base layer. If there was privacy on the base layer today, there would be no debate about spam or ordinals or whatever. These ordinals would be meaningless because you can inscribe data as ordinal inscriptions, but the rest of the network does not see that you did that. And you can only selectively reveal it to other people, and this sort of diminishes the value of your transaction and sort of crashes the whole NFT market on Bitcoin and makes it even more hardcore pro transactional. And I would love for that to happen. And I still hope that sometime in the future we're gonna get like a good version of Zcash on the base layer with the Zerocash soft fork. But what's important is that we keep talking about it and mentioning that this technology is exciting and it's great, and the Zcash team has actually shipped. In Bitcoin, we like to brag about low time preference and persistence and being committed and thinking long term. But you guys have been shipping stuff for 10 years, and Zcash has only gotten better. Like, I can think of other coins which have been around for a longer time, but the amount of improvements that they made is not as significant. But not to, praise you guys too much, because it's gonna feel like this is some sort of marketing interview or whatever. A lot of the industry today works with Zcash technology, and Fluffy Pony actually jumped in to comment on one of my posts and said, well, Zcash didn't really invent anything ZK, and you can go back all the way to the 80s and you're going to find literature that describes some of the stuff that they do. And then I actually had, what's his name, Roman, the creator of Tornado Cash, who commented on that and said, this is disingenuous because without Zcash, all of that would be purely theoretical, and you would have no libraries to actually implement zero-knowledge proofs for different purposes. So I do respect the work that you have done, and I do think that you're way ahead of your time. And I think Zcash, as an altcoin, was way ahead of its time. It was launched 9 years ago with concerns that maybe were considered to be silly at the time or paranoid. And nowadays, I think the surveillance and everything concerning invading the privacy of your transactions has gotten so much worse, and your concerns were validated. And I think the need for Zcash today is greater than it was 9 years ago, which is also why I believe in this pump, because Monero bros, they say, well, this is not organic, it looks like it came from VCs or whatever. I do believe that the demand for this technology is going to be much higher, and the price is following the technological progress. And then as soon as people realize that this went up, they're going to start researching more about it and start using it, which I think is the perfect storm. This is how you make privacy part of the mainstream. First, you attract the greedy side of people, and then they will stick around and say, well, I think this makes humanity much better.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot in that. I think your comments about the zero knowledge stuff and the development of the space, and yeah, so Zcash basically introduced ZK SNARKs to the world. There wasn't a there wasn't a public like product that used zero knowledge proofs, like general purpose zero knowledge proofs or snarks or any of that, in any industry, not just even the blockchain, but in any product ever, that had ever shipped before Zcash. Zcash did it first. And when we did it so early that not only did a lot of people think, whoa, my God, they've accelerated the timeline of snark development and deployment and production by years, which I've heard from many people. But also, we did it so early that it didn't perform that well. So we did it earlier before we had a really good product to actually integrate it into. And so we had to invent our way out of the problem by making it more efficient. And a lot of those improvements to the cryptography, to the math, the science, and then also the implementation work, and just other practical things. Just being the first to take a certain step also helps clear the way so other teams feel comfortable investing time and resources into going in the same direction, learning from us, making their own improvements. But all those things Zcash was able to do for years, and our elliptic curves and our code and our papers and all this stuff that we've built to improve Zcash over the many years, which we've actually implemented in Zcash. We haven't just done papers and talked about it, but this stuff is all used throughout the industry. Like every major project that does scaling or privacy work is using one of the things that we invented for Zcash, somewhere in their stack, at least one of the things. So that is something that we're definitely proud of at Zcash. But I'm far more proud of having actually developed the technology and then actually integrated it and shipped it into Zcash. That's way more important, because you can be clever and everyone can praise you for how smart and clever your tricks are and ideas in your papers and stuff, and that's great for your resume, but it doesn't actually do anything if you don't actually integrate it and ship it to users. And you go through the pain of having like the counterfeiting bug, or having having to actually deal with wallet migrations, and having users on mainnet that depend on your cryptography, and dealing with it. They're running into problems, their funds got stuck, and dealing with all that stuff while you're trying to ship and still delivering. That's something we've done in Zcash, and I'm way more proud of that than any of the contributions we've had in the space, which I'm also very proud of. But yeah, shipping is crucial.
Yeah, and to your credit, you guys have shipped. I gotta present 2 more ads, and then I'm gonna get to the next question, and then also get into Halo, get into Tachyon, talk about the spicy stuff. So if you want to get a drink, this is the right time. Sideshift.ai is the place where you can swap something that you have for something that you want much more. So for example, if there's someone who's paying you in stable coins, we are in the middle of a bull market, and let's say that you want to buy Zcash because it's going up. Well, one way to do it, to avoid going to KYC exchanges, would be to put that USDT, send it to Sideshift, get some BTC or LTC out of it, and then install Zashi wallet. And it has this integration that also lets you swap from BTC to ZEC. And that's actually a good way to get onboarded to Zcash. Unfortunately, Sideshift does not work in the USA, but if you really want to use Sideshift, you can find workarounds, wink wink. And what else is there to say? They have pretty good liquidity and low fees, and a lot of trading pairs, which unfortunately don't include privacy coins due to various regulations, which sucks because they have the Trump coin, but they don't have Zcash. It makes me angry when I think about it. At Zcash Sideshift, and the URL is sidshift.io. I'm gonna win a spelling contest by the end of this episode. And last but not least, there is No Ones. In the previous episode, you have seen Ray Youssef, who is the former CEO of Paxful, and now he's the CEO of No Ones. It's a peer-to-peer marketplace whose goal is to empower the global south. For him, the mission of this entire space is to get people who need banking services and need to have permissionless and somewhat private transactions to onboard them and enable them to empower themselves with this economy. And No One's has a lot of users from Africa, has a lot of users from the Middle East, from South America, basically what Ray Youssef refers to as the lions of the global south. And if you do decide that you want to trade on No One's, you're giving liquidity to these people so that they can feed their families and hustle and do whatever it is that they do with their coins. The URL is noones.com, which is funny because the website also has 8-bit graphics. I think it's an interesting pun. NES, 8-bit graphics. And they also have a spot exchange, a gift card, marketplace, a debit card if you're into that and you want to spend your coins. I'm not a big fan, but if you do like tapping your card every time you spend stuff, you can do that. And now they also have a marketplace for goods and services that you can actually check out. So it's noones.com. Thanks to all the sponsors for making this possible. Now let's get to another question concerning Halo and the fact that after you had that experience with the trusted setup and the possible inflation bug, which most likely was not exploited, you came up with Halo, which was the system to remove the trusted setup. You said previously that it was for you a way to make scaling more efficient, and it had the side effect of also obsoleting the trusted setup. But I do want to know more details, and especially if you are a video gamer who played Halo, because the next one was Halo 2, and to be honest, that's one of the best multiplayer games ever on the Xbox.
Yes, I played Halo when I was younger. I didn't play Halo 2 that much. I played the first Halo a lot, and I used to like mod Halo and stuff when I was a little kid. Um, so I was a fan of that. Wasn't why we called it Halo, though. That wasn't even my idea to call it that. Um, so yeah, so like just to be very specific, um, what Halo was it was a way to do this specific kind of thing in cryptography, which is to create these recursive proofs, recursive snarks, which are used in a lot of different blockchain projects, or I guess not very. It's actually not deployed in very many actually, but it is very useful theoretic tool to solve certain kinds of bottlenecks. Like you can make succinct blockchains with them, or you can build the things in Tachyon, which I can talk about later. But essentially allows you to distribute a computation and incrementally verify it at the same time, such that you have this really short proof that attests to that entire computation. It's like snarks on steroids, basically. Especially since you can take that proof, again, since it's a recursive, you can verify it and add more computations to it as you go. And the history of these proofs is that actually the people that founded some of the scientists that founded Zcash actually were the first to develop like the formalisms behind how to build protocols with using these proofs, something called proof carrying data, but then also had created their own had discovered their own way of actually implementing them, which is very tricky to do. You have to use these, at least at the time, you had to use these really gigantic elliptic curves that were pairing friendly that formed cycles with each other. And there's this huge multiplicative blow up here and there throughout the protocol to figure out how to deal with these huge key sizes and everything. So it's totally impractical. And before we launched Zcash, there was a lot of things that we were looking at solving using these recursive proofs, like the problem I mentioned earlier about the nullifiers. I don't know if I mentioned the nullifiers, but the double spending problem, where the state growth increases, which is the nullifier problem in Zcash. And that problem can be solved partially through these recursive proofs. And we knew this like way early on in the development of Zcash, probably even before I joined the project. But we also knew these recursive proofs were really expensive to create. And even if we could make them efficiently, the protocol would have to be radically different in order to incorporate actual changes that made it practical to solve the problem. So we never really solved it then. And we spent years thinking about how to use recursive proofs almost for scaling purposes, almost just to speculate how it could be possible to do it. And so there were some other teams that were working on recursive proofs at the time, and we were talking to some of them and trying to figure out how to do it ourselves more efficiently. And I guess just stumbled on this technique that allowed us to use normal smaller elliptic curves like the one that's in Bitcoin or specially crafted variants of it, these cycles of Koblitz curves. And we figured this technique out and wrote this paper Halo that described it. And one of the consequences is that you could do these recursive proofs without a trusted setup for the first time. It was practical. Now, in theory, you probably could do it with existing cryptography, but it would have been super expensive. Um, I don't know exactly what the current performance is of recursive proofs that don't require these techniques that were in Halo today, but certainly for many years, the best way that you could do recursion was through these things called accumulation or folding schemes that are sort of formalized variants of the technique in Halo. So we posted Halo, and there was this explosion of new papers in the field, probably like dozens of major papers that were based on Halo that came up with ways to do it even more efficiently in certain ways. But it's the same technique, it's just coming up with more clever ways to use it. So now recursive proofs are like a bog standard tool in any protocol designer, in any cryptographic protocol designer now. Certainly in Zcash, we don't consider that a bottleneck, like theoretically or practically. We can deploy and ship things with recursive proofs any day. So the question became after that was, how do we use the recursive proofs in a practical way to solve the double spending bottleneck in Zcash? And that's where Tachyon gets involved, and we can talk about that later. But yeah, that's the story of Halo, essentially.
Oh, sounds beautiful. But what it really accomplished was basically to remove the biggest criticism concerning Zcash. Like, this trusted
Yes.
setup was the reason why some people did not take it seriously. And once you had Halo, I remember hearing Amir talk about Halo, and he was mind blown like 4 years ago or something. He was like, man, you gotta look into Halo. That's the top notch cryptography. It's the coolest stuff ever. He's also building his DarkFi using Halo too.
That's cool. Yeah, no, what it did was it sort of unlocked again these recursive proofs without having to do trusted setups because of this technique. It didn't require them basically, and that's a huge unlock because now we don't have to go, oh, okay, I can deal with the trusted setup if we can solve the scaling problem. Now we don't have any trusted setup problem that we have to even worry about theoretically. There's no performance advantages to the trusted setup now. There isn't with these recursive proofs or any other parts of the crypto stack that have to do with pairings or anything like that, which we don't use those either anymore. Um, so yeah, it was a huge change in our thinking about how the protocol should be developed, and we integrated Halo into Zcash, specifically the parts of Halo, not the recursive part, but the parts that the recursion uses, these special elliptic curves and some of these other techniques, and optimize the hell out of them so that we could actually bring them to users. And most users of Zcash right now that use the shielded transactions, they're using these Halo 2 proofs right now in Zcash, which don't require a trusted setup. And that's really awesome. It's like a vibe shift in some ways. It helps dispel criticisms that we've gone over about the way it was set up. I mean, we use trusted setups because we had to. And now that we don't, we were not attached to them at all. We were willing to throw them out at the second that we didn't need them, for sure.
Yeah, it's really amazing. But it took you like, what, 5 years or something to get there?
Yeah, I mean, well, we had a lot of other things going on too, but yeah, um, probably less than that actually. I mean, it was 2019 we posted, late 2019 we posted Halo, and we launched Zcash in 2016. So, and then we had shipped a new version that improved the cryptography so you could run that on phones less than 2 years later.
That
So
that was such a major stepping stone because the biggest criticism of Zcash was that you could only use shielded transactions on a computer, and you had to run the node software or something, which is maybe computationally intensive and something that most people are not willing to do. But now you have possibly the best phone app ever with Zashi. Like, it has all the features you would want, hardware wallet integration, and this is not a paid ad or something. It's just me geeking about the features that you find there. You have a swapping integration. Basically, if you have Bitcoin or something else, you can swap that into Zcash using Zashi. It's really amazing. And it's so simple, the way it generates a new address without even telling you that it does that. The user experience is incredible, and it optimizes for privacy. Sometimes, if someone sends you Zcash from a non shielded address, you just press one button and you shield it. That's what
Yeah.
good user experience looks like.
Yeah, huge props to the Electric Coin Company for shipping all those great features in Zashi. That's a fantastic one. That's my favorite crypto wallet to use at all. I get really frustrated when I use crypto wallets throughout the whole world, just to see just how each one does the UX a little differently. And there's all sorts of clever ideas on how we can improve Zashi by learning from other projects, but I get really frustrated when I use some of these other wallets. To their credit, they're not really trying to solve the privacy issues, and Zashi is. And Zashi is being developed by people who actually care about privacy and are like cryptographic engineers and privacy experts, so they understand the privacy implications on the UX that users have to be exposed to, the number of concepts the users have to be exposed to, and things like that. They understand that very intuitively, and they think adversarially when they think of ways to improve the wallet. So it's a very stable, well-engineered wallet. It's very intuitive to use, and it does protect your privacy. It's the thing between you and the protocol that makes sure that it's using the protocol right in a way that protects your privacy. It does a great job. I love Zashi.
Yeah, I wish so. I do wish some of the software for Mac OS, for example, was updated. I tried to run a node on my Mac and I realized that the software is very old. And if I want to run the main, I'm not sure if there's a main or reference client, but I did find something on the Zcash website or the Electric Coin Company. But I would have to get a Linux machine if I want to take this seriously, and I will probably do that. Just a think book. That would be nice. ThinkPad, not ThinkBook. ThinkPad.
Yeah.
I mixed MacBook with ThinkPad and I said ThinkBook. I want to acknowledge at this point that we have more than 3,500 people who tuned in so far for this stream. And thank you guys. It's really amazing. And I received more than 20 questions using shielded transactions. If you have a new question, just use this address below and type your inquiry, and we're here to answer to whatever question you may have, as long as it's decent and not offensive in any way. What else did I want to say? I think we're good for now. Halo 2. Like, what is the main difference between Halo and Halo 2? You said that there was like a 2-year difference between them.
And well, yeah, so Halo was like a lot of things at the same time, and maybe we were kind of overloading the name Halo with the concepts that it represents. The main thing that I'm proud of with Halo is just the technique that we used, and also applying it and coming up with a way to apply it in order to do recursive proofs without a trusted setup using standard curve cycles without pairings, basically, is the mouthful that I would use to describe that. Now, we never deployed the original Halo construction in Zcash because after soon after the Halo paper was posted, or around the same time anyway, maybe just before, there was this explosion of new papers that came out. It was called Snark Timber. There's these a bunch of papers that came out in September and October of 2019, I believe, and they proposed all sorts of new constructions and techniques for doing really efficient snark stuff. or SNARKs with different models for how the cryptography, the assumptions and things like that for the cryptography. And so we needed to learn a lot from that. We wanted to deploy Halo cryptography into Zcash to learn from the experience of doing that. And so we needed it to perform really well to compete with our existing proofs. So we had to incorporate those techniques and implement them into this new protocol we designed called Orchard. And we built a new thing called Halo 2, which implemented Plonk and a bunch of other stuff to do that, to incorporate all that cryptography that we intend to use for the recursive proofs. And then we still intend to use for Tachyon. And so a couple of years later, we shipped Orchard, and that's what everyone's using now. So what we're hoping in this next evolution is to actually, what I'm hoping to do is to actually use the original Halo construction, not just the technique that's in the Halo paper, but actually it's actual SNARK construction that we used in the original protocol, while borrowing some of the ideas that have come out over the last 5 years or so from academia of how to make those constructions more efficient, and to sort of deploy the OG Halo protocol using the cryptography we shipped in Orchard into the next generation of the crypto stack with Tachyon. So that's sort of how I mentally see the evolution of things going forward.
Also want to acknowledge that the price went up to $214, which is still lower than the 2021 high or the 2018 high, but still we're getting there. And I'm challenging people to do the dance on video because I told them it's gonna hit $200 this week. They did not believe me. My told you so tweet has 150 likes so far, and I'm getting more followers because of it. I don't want to be this guy who's calling the price. I'm just saying that nothing can stop a technology whose time has come. And it seems like a lot of people are waking up right now and realizing, well, this is exactly what we need in this time and age.
Yeah, I like to, like I said earlier, I don't like to celebrate too much about price changes, or at least the way I put it the other day. I posted on X. I said I don't like being discouraged when the price is down, and I don't like being distracted when the price is up. I also don't like premature celebration because we do have a long way to go to succeed as a project and as a mission for what we're trying to build for the world and for the legacy we're trying to leave with Zcash. That being said, I mean, I do have a little smirk on my face when you mention the price changes because it's good for the project. It's also really good for the ZEC holders, and that's something a lot of other projects in the space sort of dismiss it. Like I know in the Ethereum world, at least historically, they've sort of kind of shied away from caring that much about whether the Ethereum is worth a lot or not. But if you believe in the technology and you're buying ZEC, especially when it's low and especially when the project's on life support and we're delivering and trying to make privacy better, and a lot of our technologies are being used by other projects now, the ZEC holders need to get something from in exchange for doing the right thing, which is supporting privacy and supporting Zcash. And so the value of Zcash of ZEC improving is good for rewarding good behavior, good pro-social behavior, like supporting privacy. So that's very good. I support that, and it's also like the engine that drives our project. If the value goes up, then we have more resources to hire more cryptographers and engineers to improve Zcash. And the people who are getting the whales that are getting super rich off Zcash, especially the ones that are just bought in and have been sitting with these heavy ZEC bags for years, aren't just sitting on the ZEC. They're thinking of ways, how am I going to use this to make Zcash worth more? A smaller slice of a bigger pie, so to speak. So they're doing there's a lot of philanthropy going on right now, and it's really good for the project. And so there's this feedback loop of positive developments, and price is a huge portion of that, I think. And I do sort of celebrate it quietly, and sometimes I do the dance, but I need to be careful not to celebrate. There is a lot more to do.
This is something that's relevant for our conversation because a week ago, when the price started going up and it was trending towards $100, I don't think it even hit $100, but you tweeted that you are hiring more engineers to work on Tachyon. And I sort of reacted to that and said, this is actually cool because as soon as there is more market demand for this, they're moving on and hiring people to work on something that's useful and meaningful. This is not something that you see immediately in Bitcoin, because in Bitcoin you have all of these suits who bought a lot of coins, and after they get rich, sometimes if a developer wants to build something cool, they have to go and pitch it to these VCs or to Michael Saylor or Jack Dorsey or whatever and see if they can get funding. And it's slower, it's lesser efficient, and it also comes with some compromises in some cases. But what you guys doing is more direct. Maybe it's a good side effect of, or maybe it's the intended effect, not the side effect of this dev tax that you have, which is part of the protocol.
Certainly, that's a component, especially historically, that's been important. I'd say right now it's definitely important, and going forward it'll be important. But actually, a lot of development is taking place right now that has nothing to do with the so-called dev tax. Um, I'm not working with dev tax resources. I'm not working, and Shielded Labs isn't either. Those are two major parties in the development of Zcash right now. We're not taking money from the inflation schedule in order to fund the work that we're doing. We're all working with our own resources or with the resources of private donors who are ZEC holders who want Zcash to succeed, want privacy to succeed. They're long privacy and they're long Zcash too. And so it makes sense for them to fund development. I don't know why there's this cultural problem in the Bitcoin world about donation. I've heard this a lot where I don't know. I there's a lot of people who are in Bitcoin, and this is just me speculating, but I think that they see Bitcoin like a progress bar to financial independence. And so maybe some of them are like 42%, like they could go off grid and they could buy an island or something in a few more years if the price goes up a little bit more. Maybe some of them are 10%, and they don't think about making Bitcoin more valuable. They just think about how do I get more Bitcoin, and how do I get this progress bar to go further to the right. And you don't do that by spending your Bitcoin, which is a problem, and you also don't do it by donating it. And that's why there isn't really many people in Bitcoin compared to how many people own Bitcoin. There aren't very many people spending it on anything, and it's a cultural thing because it's a how do I don't want to work a low wage McDonald's job someday, so I'm just going to buy Bitcoin. It's that sort of mentality that's um, has its pluses and its minuses, but it does mean that there's a problem with the self-sustaining development and improvement of the project as a downside for sure.
You also have a question that you received right now via shielded message. Do you follow other privacy coin development? Did you ever get any insights or ideas from how other projects implement privacy solutions?
I'm sure, yeah. The thing is, there aren't very many other projects. I mean, now that's changing, right? So other teams are thinking about and prioritizing and caring about, at least publicly in their comms, they're saying, "Oh, we really care about privacy," because it's now it's an important play, like it's an existential play for the industry. So they care a lot, but there hasn't been very many projects that actually deployed privacy. I know you can think of some on the top of your head, but if you think about it, they're actually just deploying the stuff that we deployed in Zcash years ago, or the protocols that they're actually deploying. Um, I know in Solana they had something new that came out recently that was like confidential transactions built on top of Solana. That's an idea that's been around forever. Tornado Cash um, is a basically just is a fork of the cryptography from Sapling, like literally using just the curves that they needed to in order to make it work in Ethereum, but it's the same It's the same protocol that we and it uses the same hash functions we design, all that stuff. There's nothing new there architecturally. There's other projects that haven't shipped yet that are working to improve privacy and add features, and there's some that have shipped that are still struggling. Um, but yeah, there's just not many examples to draw inspiration from, unfortunately, and I think that'll change, hopefully, with this new renewed interest in privacy. Unfortunately, a lot of other projects make trade-offs in the privacy where they say, "Oh, let's make the privacy good enough for this trade-off," and so we can't learn much from them because they're making trade-offs with the privacy. We don't do that with our on-chain privacy. Is like as good as it gets. If anything, we're only trying to make it more quantum resistant. But other than that, it's as good as it gets, and it's been that good since our launch. We don't do upgrades in Zcash to improve the privacy. I like to say we haven't done them before because our privacy was already ledger indistinguishability from the very beginning. So we improved like things around the chain privacy and the network privacy and stuff, but we haven't really improved the actual on-chain privacy guarantees in the project. That's because we've been so strict about the maximizing along the privacy dimension that a lot of trade-offs haven't been available to us, which has slowed us down on scale. But I think that we're making a lot of progress on that now with Tachyon.
Yeah, I do want to get to Tachyon, but I also want to touch upon quantum resistance and this idea that, as you mentioned, even if quantum computers become a reality, they will not be able to decrypt Zcash transactions. They are still indistinguishable. But in the case of Monero, for example, and I think about this a lot, the privacy is not permanent, it's perishable. When someone figures out a way to break the cryptography, anyone who holds a copy of a full node for the Monero network is going to be able to basically turn that into what we see today on Bitcoin, where you see all the transactions, where they went and which amount.
Yeah, absolutely. The actual guarantees against quantum computers and Zcash is more nuanced than that. We've never actually went public and said officially as a project like we are quantum resistant because it's in certain contexts we are. Like, for example, in Zcash, unlike in Monero, in Zcash the transaction graph is totally opaque even to a quantum adversary. So, 1,000 years from now, quantum computers take over the world. They still will not be able to break the anonymity properties of the protocol. It's completely zero knowledge, and that's something that the quantum computers can't break. There's other parts of the protocol that have similar kinds of guarantees, but for full quantum resistant privacy in Zcash, you actually need to be in the specific situation where your adversary doesn't have your payment address, more or less. And so that's an obscure condition that might be common, might not be, I don't know, but it's an obscure condition that we wouldn't categorically tell people, oh yeah, you're quantum resistant, you have quantum resistant privacy as long as you don't give people, as long as your adversary doesn't have your address. That's such a weird and non-intuitive thing for us to do, or to claim. So we've never claimed that. What we can do is actually make it quantum resistant in all cases for privacy. And that's what we're doing in Tachyon, actually, as sort of an accidental byproduct, because we've designed the protocol so robustly against quantum adversaries at every step that even this last component that we haven't quite made quantum resistant yet, once we do, with Tachyon, we don't have to go through and change the whole design of the protocol because we've been careful along the way to make sure that it is quantum resistant for privacy. So that's where Zcash stands currently on the quantum stuff.
Yeah, usually, so let's imagine that I'm Fluffy Pony. He's gonna come here and say, well, but Zcash is not a serious privacy project because it's not private by default. And most of the transactions are happening on exchanges or are happening with unshielded T addresses. And there's also this argument of the anonymity set. They say, well, if there are only 100 people using the shielded pool every day, then you have very low anonymity set, especially if people mention on Twitter that they sent a transaction. And how would you reply to that?
Well, I mean, these are not serious objections. I don't think they're actually serious at all. They're conflating absolute or concrete security with, like, in the hypothetical, let's say there's only 100 people using shielded transactions, so you're not very anonymous. Yeah, if you have a protocol where only 100 people are using it, then you're not very anonymous. Sure. But the security guarantees of the transactions in it depend on are separate from how many people are using it. In Zcash, we actually have way more than that have ever used the protocol. And if you do a shielded transaction, you are as anonymous. You're anonymized virtually through the whole history of that shielded pool. Whereas if you do the same thing in Monero, you're anonymized among a few other people in the transaction graph, which isn't anonymous at all, and dies to set intersection attacks trivially. So there might be more people using a protocol that's crappier with privacy or has no privacy. That doesn't mean it's better with privacy just because it has a little a little goofy situation where you might be a little private under ideal scenarios and circumstances versus a protocol where even if less people are using it, but you have a larger anonymity set. It's a totally different conversation. As for like T-adders, that also is sort of like how many people use T-adders doesn't affect your anonymity with shielded transactions in Zcash. Like if there could be 1 trillion people using T-adders and transparent transactions, not even touching the shielded pool, and that would be irrelevant to your privacy and anonymity properties, both concretely and theoretically, in the shielded pool. Doesn't affect it at all. It doesn't. That's just how the cryptography works. So I like to think of T-adders as like imagine a lot of commerce took place on like a wrapped Zcash token that exists on like Ethereum or something. That's essentially what happened. If most Zcash transactions took place because people were trading it on Ethereum on some wrapped token, and then or whatever, like some token that was bridged over to the Zcash blockchain, it would have the same consequences for privacy of shielded transactions on Zcash that the T-adders have on Zcash. You might as well just think of them as T-adders and transparent transactions as just being bridge tokens on a non-transparent blockchain. It's effectively the same implication for Zcash users. So any claim that related to the T-adders has to overcome that obstacle, that sort of rhetorical and logical obstacle, in order to be taken seriously as an argument, in my opinion. So that's why these arguments are crafted that way. I think is again just disingenuous. I don't.
Yeah, but it works, at least on Twitter. You have all of these accounts that go into your mention. They don't let you parade and celebrate too much because they're like, oh, but did you know that Zcash is this Israeli honeypot, which has mostly transparent addresses and only poses as a privacy project? And there might be inflation, there might be this other thing, like you don't even know it's zero knowledge proofs. At least with Monero, you see that drug dealers are using it to sell pot on the dark web. And that's how you know that they put their liberty on the line to prove that the network works. And of course, there's no way for you to know that these are actual people who are dealing drugs and not feds just trying to collect data about who's using this stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. All I can do as a technologist is just build good cryptography, and other cryptographers agree that what we've built is good, is actually great, is as good as it gets, and that the cryptography that some idiot on Twitter says that their stuff's better, and it's not, and all these cryptographers are saying no, that's much worse, and that's really all I can do. Maybe other people can fight the narrative in other ways. Zcash users can do that. Marketing people can do that. I just work on the best tech. The best tech is zero knowledge proofs, by far. But these arguments, like you were just mentioning with the darknet markets accepting, that's another disingenuous argument, because in my opinion, the reason why the darknet markets accept Monero is mostly historical reasons, like that Monero is around before Zcash. And so all these darknet markets actually have huge XMR bags, and so do the dealers on them. And there's liquidity limitations with holding all this stuff, but also that these people also stand to benefit a lot from increases in Monero's price, probably even more potentially than the actual illegal commerce they're engaged in. And I think downstream of criminal enterprise and that sort of antisocial thinking about risk is zero-sum thinking. So, I mean, criminals engage in zero-sum thinking all the time. I mean, that's sort of like a property of criminal enterprise. So if Zcash succeeds, Monero is going to fail, or vice versa. That's, it's just like when drug dealers are thinking about turf wars and things like that. It's the same thing. It's this very toxic and self-defeating attitude that is it's not a serious argument for why one particular privacy technology might be better than another. There's a lot of reasons that have nothing to do with whether the technology has better privacy or not. From an individual dealer on a darknet market's perspective, the risk of them going to jail for selling like DMT to some kids or something is pretty low, all things considered. So they're and drug dealers in general just have their risk tolerance is like negative. Their floor for risk tolerance is negative. If they think, because criminals are opportunists, right? So that they think, how much do I stand to benefit from the risk that I will go to jail for like 20 years? That it doesn't entirely, the only fact, it's not just the only factor is the technology. It's also what they stand to gain from it. And one of the things they stand to gain from it is the price of XMR increasing. And if their mentality is that the price increasing depends on other projects that like Zcash failing, then that's the attitude they're going to have. And they're also going to have this sort of culture of like celebrating criminality, and also appeals to authority and other fallacious kind of arguments where you'd say, oh, well, the drug dealers are accepting XMR, so that must mean that it's the most private thing, which is not the only risk calculation that a criminal's making. It's not true. And if you doubt that, just ask yourself, does that make sense, or how does it make sense that all the cryptographers in the world, essentially all the reputable cryptographers, are saying that the privacy stack in Monero, for example, is far worse? Why would they be saying that, and then you're believing the drug dealers and their opinions on cryptography?
Well, yeah, but that's another appeal to authority, right? And usually these people dislike any kind of academics, and they say, well, they're a bunch of soy boys and cocks who get paid by their governments and are under the paycheck of 3-letter agencies to say that Zcash is better than Monero. So no matter how deep you go in this argument and you try to dispel what they're saying, they're just going to resort to name calling and labeling you as something that they don't like.
That's honestly, I mean, if that's how they feel like engaging, that's okay. I mean, I don't think it makes them look serious, and it prevents them from adapting and improving and like self-reflection. They make strategic mistakes all the time. Don't interrupt your enemy when they're making a mistake, I think kind of applies here. Not that I actually really consider Monero the true like final boss of privacy. It's not at all. It's the state. It's an oppressive state. It's trying to deprive us of our rights to financial privacy. That's the real adversary that I'm concerned about. Whether or not Monero succeeds at all, it could succeed and Zcash succeed at the same time. That's totally fine. So, but if the Monero people want to engage like that, they can. All I can say is that I work on privacy tech. I'll let other people make the arguments for their own projects, and however it is that they want to. If they want to decline themselves, then that's their prerogative. But engaging with those kind of silly arguments and fallacious arguments and appeals to authority and name calling and all that kind of stuff is just lowering yourself to them, and that's why I don't talk about Monero that much. I probably shouldn't even talk with them at all, but yeah, just my thoughts on the topic.
I do understand that in the case of Monero, the brand, the name, and the reputation of the project is much stronger than the privacy guarantees that it offers. And to their credit,
amongst some people, yeah, potentially certain like criminals, but yeah.
To their credit, they did have, so usually when they lose the technical argument, they say, well, but Zcash is funded by this and this, and look at the names on the Zerocash paper, and look at the people who funded Zcash and the dev tax and everything, and just think that Monero started from nothing, just a fork of a protocol that was dumped by the creator and had this unfair pre-mine. And we decided to launch it fairly, and it was bootstrapped organically, and it was grassroots. And I think this is the most merit that they have, is that they bootstrapped this network by themselves voluntarily with minimal resources, and they were able to keep it alive for such a long time.
Yeah, this is the reason why I don't say that. Like every single every project's different in this space. Like Monero has its advantages and disadvantages. I mean, unless our projects were exactly the same, which they aren't, you would have no competitive advantage if you were exactly the same. If you made the same trade-offs, and so that some of the trade-offs and decisions and historical decisions and things like that Monero made or Zcash made appeal to different audiences. And in Monero's case, they have this sort of origin story that they like. We have an interesting origin story as well. You can totally criticize and make fun of the Monero origin story if you try really hard, right? I mean, if you really steelman it, you can figure out a way to come up with, like, again, disingenuous criticisms of it if you tried. And you can do that to Zcash. You can say, oh, all these Jewish people or Israeli people are building cryptography. I mean, that's silly because a lot of cryptographers are from Israel, so that's just silly, just in general. But I don't know. I don't like engaging with those ridiculous arguments. It kind of just, I lose brain cells thinking about it.
And we would not want you to lose brain cells, of all people.
I only have a few left, so please, yes.
Someone sent a shielded memo and said, is it a memo? Is it a message? I'm going to have to...
It's a memo.
It's a memo.
Yep.
He says, can you comment on network level privacy on Zcash, Tor, Freenet, I2P, or something else? Does it even matter?
Definitely matters. It totally matters. Our wallets, like Zashi, is starting to add all these features, and they're integrating Tor into the wallet, and that's been a thing that's been going on for a long time now. I don't have very many opinions on the actual network privacy stack because research in that area is so foreign to the kind of cryptography and privacy research I do. There's so many active attacks that are different categories of attacks than the ones that I study, like more mathematical and in nature. So it's really tricky. There's a lot of like obfuscation and heuristics that you have to use in that sort of privacy world, which is why I don't have much of an opinion on it. It always makes me feel uncomfortable when you're using those kind of arguments, because in Zcash we actually get away with our on-chain privacy. Doesn't really need to think about those kinds of attacks because we can just work under this really simple umbrella of making transactions indistinguishable. But that being said, yeah, network privacy is very important for certain kinds of adversaries and for certain kinds of users and certain kinds of economic activity. We're making progress there. I don't have any particular thoughts, but there's a lot of technologies, mixed nets and things like that, NIM, all that kind of stuff that is exciting. I'm not the guy to ask, really, but I think that is important. I can think of scenarios where your privacy might be on-chain perfect, but you can totally be targeted. and that needs to be resolved as well.
Yeah, did you take a look at NIM, which is this project building a mixnet?
Yeah, exactly. That's what what immediately comes to mind is NIM, for example. And a lot of our thinking about payment protocols for Zcash, actually, we take a step back and go, does NIM solve this problem? It's NIM-like things. Do NIM-like mixnets and things like that? Do those solve this particular problem without having to like degrade the UX or whatever? And memos come into that as well, because how are we going to send memos to a recipient in a scalable blockchain world where we need this highly available mechanism to communicate with the recipient? And that's one of the elements of Tachyon we could talk about, where we need to do these communications out of band. And if we're doing them out of band, then we have to ask questions about things like mixnets and network privacy.
I'm sort of bullish on NIM, but at the same time, they do have to figure out some details about their setup. Right now, they're selling their VPN subscription at a 90% discount, and you can actually buy that with shielded Zcash. They implemented this using something that's called BTC Pay, which works with shielded Zcash. Very interesting. And I wanted to take just a step back. I have more questions that I received as shielded messages, but I wanted to take a step back and reflect on what you said about zero-sum thinking and privacy, and the fact that you have this warfare happening between projects. And maybe that the obvious one in this conversation is Monero versus Zcash, but if you look at messaging, you're going to see that there is Telegram versus Signal, and there is no coin or token there to be pumped, or there is no financial incentive. It's just people who believe that if they leverage geopolitics, as supposedly Telegram does, then you are more censorship resistant and potentially more private, because the servers are in Russia and the NSA has a harder time collecting data from that, supposedly. Maybe your computer is backdoored and compromised, or your connection. Anyway, and then there are people who believe in cryptography and they use Signal, and they say they would rather trust the cryptography assumptions of Signal than trust in the politics of Telegram. And if you take a step back even more, you're going to see that for mobile phone distributions of Android forks, which are hardened for security and privacy, you have Calyx OS versus Graphene OS. And these people don't get along at all. They fight and they're involved in flame wars all the time. And a few years ago, I was involved in the battle between Samurai Wallet and Wasabi Wallet in Bitcoin. And I was on the Wasabi camp because I felt like these guys are actually paying cryptographers and engineers and people to actually push the boundaries of what is possible with this limited concept of a CoinJoin on Bitcoin, whereas Samurai were super kind of overconfident. They were saying, well, our product is already the best. We don't need to improve anything. If you don't like it, you're an idiot. If you think that this is a problem, then maybe you should learn how Bitcoin works. You're stupid, blah, blah, blah. Wasabi actually improved and were hiring researchers to write papers to make their software better, to improve their UX, which I think was a major stepping stone. And yeah, there seems to be two sides which are dominant in the field of privacy, and they don't seem to get along. And my theory about this is that there are a lot of feds infiltrated, and they stir the pot, and they try to make it look like no product is good enough, so that normies who are watching this battle are gonna be like, yeah, this is suboptimal. Maybe I should not get involved in this. Look, everything has trade-offs I don't like. Maybe I should not use privacy at all.
Yeah, I do think that's unfortunate, and it is a trend. I've noticed that as well. I don't know why. I think maybe it's something to do with just the topic. Privacy is such a... You have to have paranoid thinking to defend yourself against assaults on your privacy in like every sense, politically, technologically, and so on. And so I think that the kinds of people who are really passionate about a privacy technology are probably also like evangelists for it. and evangelism isn't necessarily zero sum thinking, but it gets even worse, I guess, when there's money involved. So that's why you see a lot of tension in the cryptocurrency world when it comes to privacy projects feuding. Probably, I don't really get the incentive and the motivation behind trying to tear privacy projects in like Android distros or messaging apps feuding with each other. But I don't really see a lot of. I think there's always one side that's right. That I'm on the side of, even though I think there's always room for competition and people making different trade-offs. The Signal people don't sit around all day like insulting the Telegram people. I've noticed they just work on making their product better, and sometimes they have to make decisions that piss off people who really like Telegram. Like, why haven't you added this feature that's in Telegram? And the Signal folks are really disciplined in saying, no, we're not going to add that feature. I know you really like it. I know you're going to call Telegram much better and easier to use and stuff, but we have to add it right to Signal. We have to do it for the right reasons. And I'm biased a little bit toward that. And also the cryptographers. Obviously, just the tech is better with Signal. Graphene OS, I really like Graphene OS a lot. I use it. I don't know that much about Calyx OS or whatever it is that you mentioned. I know that I know that community, or there's other people in that world that hate graphene and vice versa. Maybe I don't understand the point of that, but I think it is just paranoia and adversarial thinking that leads to that. Cryptographers fall into this problem when they think of this happens a lot in protocol design with cryptographers. Like they think, oh no, that assumption that it's unfalsifiable. So we can't depend on that, which is really stupid, I think. Like an early example would be in Zcash, we were going to rely on these really strong assumptions for our soundness of our protocol to prevent counterfeiting, but we didn't rely on strong assumptions for privacy. And there was this tendency for the cryptographic experts, not just that were working with us, but also people around us in academia, to be really skeptical of the assumptions we were using, ones that are used like all the time now. But if you think about it, it'd be much, much worse if the privacy depended on these assumptions. The privacy in Zcash doesn't depend on a trusted setup, and it doesn't depend on, and never has. And we're totally okay with the protocol breaking. Well, I mean, it's not good, but we're totally okay with it breaking as long as the privacy is okay. We maximize along that dimension, that risk trade-off. That's a pragmatic thinking about protocol design and adversarial thinking, I think, because the alternative is that you don't have good privacy tech at all, but possibly. So there's a lot of traps that cryptographers and privacy experts fall in, and adversarial thinking, and just the mentality that's involved in designing these protocols. So I'm not surprised to see that stuff throughout the whole privacy ecosystem, but it is unfortunate. You know.
I'm just trying to delay the topic of Tachyon to get into more stuff, because I feel like once we get into Tachyon, that's the main event. That's basically what people came to see, and I just keep pushing it, hoping that right now we exceeded 4,000 viewers on the live stream, which is amazing. Yeah. Thank you guys for joining. There's another question as a shielded message, and it says, is running a full node for an average home user a goal in Zcash? Is there a block size word that could happen at some point?
I would love it if in Zcash someday you could run a full validating node, no matter how many transactions are taking place in Zcash. That would be awesome. Will we get there? I don't know, but in some ways, the work that I'm doing with Tachyon and the work that, not with Tachyon necessarily, but in future upgrades that use some of the same cryptographic techniques, we can actually incorporate changes that remove the bottlenecks that would prevent full nodes from being ran on just like your laptop or your computer at home or something like that. I think there's probably still going to be some heavy constraints placed, but we should I think endeavor on making making it as widely accessible to be a full node as possible in Zcash. So I totally think about that all the time. I think that's important for sure.
So
I
what would
factor
you
that
say
in.
are the system requirements to be able to run a fully validating node?
Well, I mean, I run a fully validating node, but I have a beefy computer. I'm sure it would be more painful with crappier hardware, but doable. But it's hard to say that because we haven't really. We're not talking about how many people are using Zcash. If more people are using Zcash, are we gonna sacrifice the requirements or the permissive requirements for full nodes or not? Can we afford to with the cryptography that we have? Yeah, that's really tricky. And also, how do you compare the requirements? Like the state growth problem is a separate kind of requirement, like qualitatively different than a requirement how much memory you need to have, or how much bandwidth you need to have for your internet connection to run a full node. And it's hard to figure out exactly like which of those metrics to optimize for. I don't know. I wouldn't be able to just offhand give you numbers of like the requirements or anything like that. That's something that people will have to think about. I just want to make them as low as I can. That's all I care about. Make the requirements as low as possible. And if there's a bottleneck in the cryptography that's causing the requirements to be higher than necessary, then I want to fix that. Whether it's if it's in our cryptography, I'd like to fix that. If it's something that other teams in the blockchain space are fixing in their own way, I feel like we should just take whatever the best options are that other teams are using and just use that in Zcash, for sure. I just want to make sure our privacy isn't sacrificed and we keep that rock solid. That's important.
Yeah, there is other ZK technology which is sort of a spin-off from Zcash, and it's called SNARKs. And they claim that they don't claim it's actually possible that you can basically sync a full node just by validating this ZK proof. And also, they claim to be quantum resistant and much more scalable than ZK SNARKs. It's also made by Eli Ben-Sasson, who is one of the authors of the Zerocash paper back in 2013. And some of these ideas were supposed to be available to Bitcoin. Now they're on Ethereum, waiting for their day to also become available on Bitcoin. What do you think about ZK SNARKs?
I think SNARKs are awesome, and I hope that they continue to be developed. Obviously, over the last several years, they've been developed primarily for scale, and they're using a lot of the techniques that, especially the thing you just mentioned, that actually has to do with things like recursive proofs and stuff like that, to build these validators that can take a huge amount of computation and to verify it in a small amount of time and with tiny proofs, no matter how big the computation is. That's, I think, what you're alluding to that they're doing with SNARKs for some of the stuff they're building. And that's the same thing as the recursive proofs thing I was mentioning earlier. So, but in Starkland, they're building this using cryptography that's lighter in some ways and requires and doesn't require making hardness assumptions on problems that are not quantum resistant. So and they get the scale and they get the performance with the quantum resistance as a byproduct, it seems like, which is cool. That's awesome. I want them to keep developing that, and obviously in the Bitcoin world, that's like the best. If you could have no trust assumptions, quantum resistance, and really, really, really fast verification, that's awesome. And so that's what we're trying to do also, except we're a little bit more sensitive in Zcash to the proof size currently in our current architecture, and SNARKs proofs are much larger. So that's the real downside, and that could just be a temporary limitation of our architecture. It could, we're overcoming bottlenecks that are more serious and then working our way down to the less serious ones. I don't think Starks, we want to integrate those in our current stack, but we're totally open to integrating whatever makes our protocol better. So I'm bullish Starks for sure.
Oh, that's so nice to see. This ZK space supporting each project. Anyway, you got another shielded note. This guy is asking, what do you think about Noster? Could you see Zcash being used for zaps at some point?
I've never used Noster before. I know of it, and it's cool and stuff. That's nice. I don't really have any idea. I wonder if this is being asked because there's something to do with the memos that has to do with the question. Do you think maybe is that what part of the question is, or is it just
No,
like
I don't think so.
should oh, okay, all right, well,
in Noster,
I don't know.
basically everything is public. So if you have the same asymmetric cryptography setup with a public key and a private key. If everyone who's interacting with you can see the public key, and if they just paste the public key into the login screen, they can see even your DMs, but only with whom you're talking. So not the content of the DMs, but they can see basically with whom you've been exchanging messages, what time and stuff like this. And also your feed, like what kind of stuff you're interested in.
So it just sounds like a peer-to-peer social network that uses like Bitcoin's public keys.
No, it doesn't use the Bitcoin public keys. It uses kind of the same model for setting up an account. And it's also it kind of sucks because if your account gets compromised, if someone gets access to your private key or you forget your private key, there is no recovery system. Like that account is gone. You have to start from scratch.
Cool.
You have to get your followers once again. It's work.
I think that so the question was paying for things with Noster using Zcash?
You have Zaps, which is a way to use the Lightning Network, mostly custodial, but this is the state of the network right now, to basically tip people for their posts. So if you like what they have posted or you like their idea, you can send an amount of Bitcoin to them.
I would love to support Lightning invoice payments with Zashi. That would be really cool. If you like, Zashi has this feature called CrossPay for viewers that aren't aware, where you can take an address in like Solana or Bitcoin or whatever address, and you can send payments to it from Zashi, and what it'll do is it'll unshield your ZEC as necessary, and then swap it using near intents, and pay it out to the recipient on the chain that you're sending them the payment on, which is really cool because it keeps your entire transaction history private and detached from the economic activity that you're engaged in. So it keeps you nice and private and safe, but allows you still to transact with people on other blockchains. I don't think that there's support for Lightning invoices in that protocol, but it'd be really cool if there was an intermediary or whatever that could handle the Lightning invoices for you, so you could pay those in ZEC with the cross pay stuff. That would be really neat. Then you don't care, right? Then who cares if Noster does anything or whatever? Just that I guess they could add Zcash support and use the same mechanism if they wanted to do this kind of cross pay thing if they wanted into their apps or whatever. Yeah, that would be really exciting.
That's possible with what they call an LSP, like Breeze or Phoenix, which basically provides you the infrastructure for the channels. And you just open the channels yourself with your own funds. And of course, there's a bottleneck for scaling. Maybe that Zashi can basically open the channels and let anyone send transactions to Bitcoin via Lightning. I'm not sure how this would work, if there would be a swap or even that there could be an atomic swap if this is optimized the right way, so it's trustless.
Totally. I mean, yeah, the transaction on the Zcash chain can just do the same swap logic that the HTLCs or whatever and for the Lightning channels use. Yeah, in theory. That's kind of interesting.
It could be amazing, but then again, Lightning has turned out to be a disappointment overall.
Unfortunately, yes, it's cool, but then also, yeah, practically it has been disappointing.
The only way in which it works well is when it's more centralized. My God, my notifications are so full right now. Anyway, someone wants to know, does shielded Zcash have a dust problem? For example, will Vlad have a problem sending a shielded transaction with all the small transactions from these questions?
Uh,
I don't think
a
he
dust
understands.
a
He thinks
dust
these
problem?
are separate UTXOs, but I think that in the shielded pool, it sort of works like the account model, right?
No, it doesn't. It will cost you money to. It will cost you more money to spend from any of those particular nodes if they're smaller. So in that sense, I see what it means. The dust attack or whatever. Yeah, you have to pay per UTXO. Now there are ways to solve that too, that don't require an account model. Account models actually are really hard to make private. It depends on how the architecture works, but um, you can do like roll-up spends of multiple transactions, for sure. You're probably going to end up paying still somewhat proportional to how many notes you're spending. So every one of those transactions, if you're getting like one Satoshi, if you want to spend it, if it's worth anything for you to spend, then you're going to have to pay to spend it, probably more than it's worth for sure. So I wouldn't consider those spendable notes in your wallet. And I wonder if Zashi actually just throws those in like a corner of your wallet and doesn't even consider them spendable, possibly.
Yeah, I was thinking about this too when you mentioned the issue of quantum resistance and the fact that, for example, this QR code that I put right here on the screen, it's vulnerable to quantum attacks. So basically, if I wanted to take my, how should I put them? Donations or whatever, they're small amounts. If I wanted them to not be stolen by a quantum computer in 30 years or something, then a good idea is to just send all the funds to another address. And I'm gonna pay a high transaction fee, I think, for that. But at least that address is not leaked publicly, so I get much better security. Could be cool if there was just one button to do this, so you don't have to set it up yourself to do a self transfer.
There's this thing related to this that is being discussed and developed in the Zcash world right now amongst the protocol designers called the long-term storage pool, or a long-term storage pool, which is designed not for making payments, but for putting your money in long-term storage in such a way that, for one thing, it's quantum resistant. Like there's a simple protocol that allows you to thaw your frozen funds, maybe for a price, but allows you to thaw them to get their money out into into your hot wallet that uses some future shielded protocol, let's say. And it's really easy to design these protocols when they're meant specifically for long-term storage and not payments. It's actually quite nice. And so we've been thinking about how to incorporate that with some of our other protocol design um, trade-offs and things like that, especially with Tachyon. So that's been an interesting point to consider.
Okay, I think this is the last question before we move on to Tachyon. This person wants to know if you have looked at the Avalanche Pre-Consensus like eCash has implemented. Great for rapid finality that you expect from a digital cash.
I'm just gonna hand wave this away. I'm not a consensus person. I really don't. I don't know. No clue. I do crypto, do like cryptography. Uh, Consensus stuff is there's so many variables involved and so many trade offs. I just trust experts that work on that stuff, and to maybe Avalanche has got a good design, maybe not. I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay, now let's get to Tachyon, which uses something that's called, if I'm not mistaken, oblivious synchronization.
Yeah, so this is really exciting. I was mentioning earlier that we had been working on using these recursive proofs to scale Zcash, even like way early on in the project, thinking of ways that we can solve problems like the double spending problem. Um, how do we solve that with recursive proofs? And we knew that they were going to be incorporated somehow, but we didn't know exactly what the architecture would look like and whether it'd be practical or not. And then with Halo, we made the proofs practical, but still we hadn't figured out the whole scheme. And after some development and going through some dead ends that didn't work, and some other teams actually had been thinking about the same problem and hadn't really gone anywhere, I was more open to some radical changes to the actual protocol itself that would make it so that we can prevent double spends in such a way that we can actually outsource the problem of creating these recursive proofs, and also outsource the bandwidth exposure of the user's wallet to the activity on chain to a third party, and this third party could construct the proofs and do all this stuff to solve the scaling issue with the preventing the double spends. And can we do that in a way that makes the protocol private, still keeps it as private as it is today? And it turns out with some changes to the architecture, we can actually build this thing, which we call an oblivious synchronization service, which does exactly this. You don't trust the service. It doesn't learn about anything about your wallet. It doesn't even gain an advantage in distinguishing your transactions on chain from anyone else's. So it's totally trustless. And you're not married to this service at all. You can use any service that's willing to provide that for a payment or whatever it is, however they're incentivized to do this. And they do all the hard work of making sure that that your coins in your wallet are spendable because they haven't been spent before. And they send these proofs back to your client, and your client kind of finishes the job a little bit. And validators, as a result, don't need to keep this list of all these objects called a nullifier that scales linearly with the number of transactions that ever take place in the protocol. They don't have to keep this list anymore. They can prune it continuously, which means that you can do something you can't do in Bitcoin and pretty much any other protocol, which is that validators can completely prune the state continuously. Of like all shielded transactions in the Tachyon model can be pruned forever by fully validating nodes. They don't need them to verify new transactions, as long as these proofs are constructed by these syncing services that operate over the history of the blockchain. And the privacy model is strong. I mean, you could potentially do that already in some models, but it's hard to get the privacy right. This gets the privacy perfectly right. So that's the point in the trade-off space we've nailed with this design. That's why I'm really excited about it. And that's like the core component of Tachyon, is building this part of the protocol. It requires actually changing the way that our Zerocash based protocol shielded pool stuff works in some subtle ways. Changes the way that these so-called nullifiers work, but it's totally doable. It's totally doable, and that's what I'm building.
Yeah, I think I've seen from this presentation that you attended last week a slide that said that you are expecting this to be shipped next year, and that you also believe that this launch is gonna give Zcash like enough time to be the leader for at least 3 years.
No, well,
like you're gonna be ahead.
In some ways, we already are a leader. I mean, still, and shipping and privacy tech is, we haven't compromised on that. But on scale, we're making the first major jump in a while on scale, and the architectural changes that are needed to solve this problem without sacrificing the privacy are so different and so non-intuitive to the way that a lot of projects in the space that are building privacy-based like cryptocurrencies and layer twos and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't really work with their plans right now. And they're just trying to ship mainnets, or they have shipped mainnet and they're trying to get customers and stuff like that. We're in a really good spot to actually invest in scaling research and deploy it into our protocol right now, and make these massive architectural changes to the way the protocol works. we can do that while our system is functioning and while people are using it, which is awesome. That lead time is something we have to keep maintaining by shipping and building continuously. So I really treasure that sort of lead time and that credibility that gives us also for having. We don't just talk about building things. We've just continuously actually shipped these things. So.
Yeah, this is something that I really respect, and maybe it's also the reason why we see this massive pump right now. Like, for many years, if not decades, we have had this concept where added privacy meant larger data size, larger signatures, larger everything, which requires more computation, more memory, more resources for everything. And when you came up with Tachyon and I looked at the paper, I was like, this is like the holy grail of privacy. Because it provides privacy that is scalable without significant compromises. We've had Mimblewimble, which was sort of similar in its scope, but it never really took off, and the privacy guarantees of Mimblewimble are much weaker than those that you get from ZK SNARKs. And to be honest, it feels so exciting when you think about it that from now on, once you ship Tachyon, this argument that, well, privacy doesn't scale, it will not be part of the conversation anymore, and it might just solve the trilemma, right?
Yeah, I guess the nuanced view of what we've done is we've actually just removed the privacy. Yeah, like you said, the privacy doesn't scale argument doesn't work anymore. We are putting ourselves to be the nuanced take is that we're putting ourselves in the same position that non-private chains are, where they're bandwidth constrained, latency constrained, and all that kind of stuff. Our cryptography doesn't impose any with Tachyon doesn't impose any new bottlenecks on top of that in order to get the strong privacy guarantees that we have. So yeah, that solves some sort of dilemma or trilemma in the design space by basically getting rid of the worst bottlenecks. But we're still going to have bottlenecks and scaling issues that could be solved with even better architectures maybe in the future, or and we can obviously leverage the work that's being done by other projects that have nothing, that don't even incorporate privacy into their product, into their blockchains or whatever. We can leverage those techniques now that we have the privacy at the ground layer, and we can solve the other issues. I mean, that's kind of the advantage of the way that we've been developing Zcash, is that we started with a very strong layer of privacy that we didn't want to compromise on, and then we worked on scale on top of that and usability. Rather than doing it in the other direction where you build all these features and you scale them and you create a scalability architecture for your protocol, but then you want to add privacy on top. The only way to really do that without having to redesign the whole thing and blow up your entire product market fit and everything is to bolt on crappy privacy on the top layers on different pieces to plug leaks, which isn't how protocol engineers think about security, and it definitely isn't how cryptographers think about privacy. The layers below will compromise the layers above, and especially with privacy, because you cannot undo damage when it comes to leaking private information you've done, metadata, etc. So you need this stuff baked into both the fundamentally in the protocol and also pervasively through the protocol stack, all the way up to the user experience in the wallets. And so we've been doing that first, and then thinking about scale, which puts us in yet another like a strategic advantage that we can take advantage of for like having a multi-year lead time on other projects.
Where does this claim that it can scale to billions of users come from? Is there any actual test about it, or is it just math?
Well, it in the sense it is just math, because there's no longer a actual like real cryptographic bottleneck in the Zerocash construction anymore. You don't need to scan the whole blockchain for your transactions. You don't need to, validators don't need to have this state growth that grows completely out of control, which is like historically been like a reason why most projects are like, oh, we can't add privacy to our thing because if we do it the strongly like Zcash does, then it just the state growth blows out of proportion. Or there's other things too that they were concerned about. We've resolved all those problems over the years, and now with Tachyon, this last problem in the cryptography scales great. So now there's not really an excuse for why privacy can't scale to billions of users. I mean, if privacy can't now, then nothing can, is the way I think about it. So if you're a project in this space and you think you can scale to billions of users, there's no reason that we can't. So it's math, and it's also vibes too. Those are important.
Vibes. I've actually received a very cool transaction from someone who said, "This is for your dust fee. Thanks Vlad and Sean for doing what you're doing." And let's get to the Tachyon related questions. Is the Tachyon project an upgrade of the Orchard pool, or is it a new privacy pool, or neither?
It's very likely to end up, I think probably 99% is going to end up as a separate pool than Orchard. So it's going to be something that people have to upgrade to. And there's some advantages and disadvantages of that. And I think the advantages, having thought about it from both perspectives and kind of changed my mind a little bit throughout the process, making it its own separate pool is probably the best approach. It keeps the architecture simpler. There's fewer ways the privacy can get screwed up in order to support the legacy protocol during transition periods of the way the architecture works. So yeah, it's just simpler that it be its own pool, and it's not, the downsides aren't really that bad. I think one of the reasons why we've tried to shy away from building new shielded pools is because some of our cryptographers, including myself, have had this bias against introducing turnstiles because there's been this heavy cost that the user has to pay. Usually it was in the form of new addresses, or how does it work when I cross shielded pool boundaries when I'm making payments and stuff. But we've largely mitigated these in different ways with the way that our wallets work and the way that our addresses work. And we're also just like really cognizant of that pain when we're developing payment protocols. And so I think that we're in a good spot to make it so that this is like the least disruptive new shielded pool that we can introduce, hopefully. And it would be much better if adding new shielded pools it wasn't a scary process. It wasn't like, oh no, the users have to deal with another pool. Hopefully pools are not something, or these shielded protocols within Zcash are not something that users have to care about. And if you use Zashi right now, I don't even think you are exposed to the distinction between, at least in any of the UX that I've seen, that you're exposed to the distinction between like Orchard and Sapling, for example. They just look like addresses to your wallet, and your wallet just handles it. So hopefully we're in that spot.
There's also someone who sort of asked the same questions. He said, started late, but did you say there will be a new pool for Tachyon? Please ignore if you answered already. Signed by Zekrimoni. I just wanted to read this because he sent the transaction, and I respect it.
Okay, cool. I'll ignore it to answer yes.
When do we get to deep dive into Tachyon? Can Sean explain how moving the secret off-chain will retain the existing level privacy? Where will the secret be stored? How can we be sure it will stay private?
So this secret thing that this person's talking about is this concept, this part of our protocol, which is the last part, by the way, that's not quantum resistant right now, or quantum private, post-quantum private in our protocol right now, is the way that the sender gives the recipient secrets they need to spend their money. And the reason why those secrets even exist in the first place is because we need to make it so that the data that they need to spend is random, basically, or randomized, indistinguishable from everyone else's coins or notes. And so that's part of it. And so, and we also need to communicate some other things that aren't secrets that I could go into later. But that communicating those secrets And to an extent, the memos also are part of that. It's actually put into the same component of the transaction, the shielded transaction. Distributing that to the recipient is really hard to do in a scalable way, not just the quantum stuff, but it's the scale that's the concern. And so we have a large number of options to how to do payment protocols that don't involve what are called in-band secret distribution, where the actual transaction, the secrets are in the transaction itself that goes on the blockchain, which doesn't scale. And I don't think anyone has argued that we're going to be able to plausibly scale the protocol by putting ciphertext on the blockchain like that. So, so we're exploring the different UXs that in UX consequences for different payment protocols that don't rely on in-band secret distribution. That requires us to think about a whole host of other issues, like how viewing keys might or might not work, how wallet backups and restore functionality from chain history would or would not work, and how to replicate those behaviors and user expectations of features using a layer that it does scale or that is at least detached from the core protocol, the Zcash protocol, where the actual payments take place. There isn't necessarily a reason for most transactions for you to actually need to send these secrets over a global broadcast channel that archives all the messages or all the ciphertexts in a highly available storage space. Like there's no real need to do that. In fact, we have usually the complete opposite requirement, which is just that the sender and the receiver have a channel open already, and the sender can send a payment to the recipient on chain and can send all the secrets over their existing communication channel via signal or via NFC on their phone or QR codes or whatever. They're in person, so they can, in a lot of cases, they can do that. So there has to be some trade-off in between where we get really good UX, but then we also don't have the scaling problems. I think we'll nail it. We'll figure it out. But that's more of a UX thing than a protocol thing. The core protocol definitely cannot scale and never will be able to scale if it has ciphertext attached to the transactions the way it is now. It just doesn't work.
How will wallet syncing work with Tachyon? Will it need an outside server?
Yeah, so syncing with this oblivious synchronization model for how it uses recursive proofs and proof carrying data and all that with remote servers, basically the user isn't exposed to the size of the chain or all the transactions and stuff that are taking place or have historically taken place. They can have a third-party server do that, not just for figuring out the money, how to prove that they can spend the money, but also to prove that they haven't spent it yet. They can defer that with this oblivious synchronization model to this remote service, and the remote service takes on all the bandwidth costs and computational costs, or most of the computational costs. And so the answer is that the scanning doesn't, to the extent that any kind of syncing takes place on the client, it's extremely cheap, and anything that would be expensive can be outsourced to a third party that you don't trust. You don't have to trust them. And they don't learn anything about your wallet. And to the extent that your client would normally need to scan the blockchain for new incoming transactions, with the payment protocol changing, the user also is not exposed to that cost, or not nearly as much, because this in-band secret distribution stuff is being removed. So that is no longer really a concern either. I guess that hopefully answers the question.
Yeah, I hope so too. Is there anything about Tachyon that I did not ask you about and is super important?
The last component, there's three major components in Tachyon. There's the oblivious sync that we just talked about. There's the removal of the in-band distribution, secret distribution, which we also talked about, the payment protocol stuff. And the third part, which also comes hand in hand with this, is this other thing called shielded aggregation. And the idea is that if you have a bunch of shielded transactions in a block, you don't want to have the separate transactions have to be validated independently or that take up independent space. And so just like with signature aggregation, we should be able to merge them together more or less so that the marginal size of them is considerably smaller than it is now, or that it would be without in the absence of this feature. And also the verification time is the marginal verification time is extremely small as well. And we can do that with there's protocols that people have developed over the years to do that, which have different scalability trade-offs and complexity trade-offs. The best protocol, asymptotically speaking, would use recursive proofs, just like we're using with the oblivious syncing system. And so with recursive proofs, you just do exactly that. The block producer's block contains proofs that all the transactions and the shielded transactions inside are valid, and all these components of the shielded transaction, the recursive proofs that are within each one of them get folded together into this main aggregate, shielded aggregate in the block, or one or more of them. And this like makes the marginal cost of the marginal size and verification time of the transactions comparable to Bitcoin style transactions, which is great without having to change the privacy model at all. That it just that increases throughput, and that really helps with scale as well. So those are the three components, and they're all being designed in conjunction with each other because they rely on related either cryptographic primitives like the recursive proofs, or related changes to the key structures or other kinds of changes to the protocol design. So those three are happening at the same time in Tachyon, and they solve different problems, but pretty much all of the scaling problems they solve with the core cryptography.
Another question says, is this Tachyon sync server just a Zcash full node or a different type of node running next to the Zcash full node?
It's going to have to do stuff that a full node doesn't do, so I wouldn't say it's the same thing. It needs to probably be, well, I don't know if it necessarily needs to be a full node or anything like that. It does need to be exposed to all of the pertinent contents of blocks, and needs to be able to read those as new blocks are produced, and then construct proofs about the stuff in those blocks that it can then reuse later to service requests from clients. So yeah, the answer is that it's kind of like a service that's built on top of a full node, and that does extra computational work, and can amortize some of that computational work across many different wallets, more or less.
I think it's super cool. How many people are currently working on Tachyon, and how many are you hiring?
Oh, okay. So there's a lot of people who are excited about it in the Zcash world, and I've had conversations with very in-depth technical protocol design conversations with people at the Electric Coin Company and other people in the ecosystem that have their own thoughts on the UX and the cryptography. So there's a lot of people that are thinking about it and thinking especially of the implications on the wallet UX currently. But in terms of just pure protocol development, it's just been me so far until recently. I made one hire, Tal Durai, and he started this month. And I am hiring at least one more Rust engineer, probably more than that, Rust engineer to help also work on not just the cryptography, but also the integration work into the protocol itself. So definitely, if anyone's interested in working on this, this is very exciting, novel stuff. It's very fun, and it's for a good cause too. So if you're interested, please reach out to me and see if you're a good fit for the team.
So how big of a team do you think that you need for shipping on time?
For the protocol changes that I want to do over the next year with Tachyon, I think we could do it with a team of like 3 or 4 engineers. And you don't have to be a genius cryptographer to do this stuff. Like, it would be one thing if we were talking about like blue sky research that still needs to be done or whatever. We're not in that situation now. Like, it's obvious what cryptographic primitives we have to use. We just have to engineer and design the integration with the protocol, which we've done like 3 times before in Zcash's history. So we're just doing that again, and it gets more complicated and more interesting, but that's how it always goes. So yeah, I'm not really convinced that I need a huge team to do this, nor am I convinced that I need like genius snark experts. A lot of the snark stuff, actually, we've done the engineering and research and development of that already. Like, what we're going to deploy likely in Tachyon will just be based on the cryptography we designed 6 years ago, heavily inspired by some recent developments, but more or less it's the same thing. So yeah, I'm not really needing a big team or a team of like academics or something. So it's totally doable.
It sounds nice. So what's the ETA? 1 year from now?
Yeah, sometime next year I would like to ship as early as possible, because there's always delays and stuff. So the sooner that I get things out, the more tolerant I am to delays and other problems that might be out of my control. Plus, if we have to we have to deal with like auditing results that come back and say, oh, there's a flaw or whatever, or security proofs that don't work or something, and we have to handle that as well. So there needs to be an effort to really ship quickly, because if you don't have that kind of thinking, then you can't handle the inevitable delays. And so I'm on a real fast pace schedule right now, working on this stuff. So my ETA is to get this in the protocol next year. Now, getting it into the wallets after that is like, it's something I'm going to be thinking about working on to an extent before shipping it into the protocol for sure. But the wallet upgrade process, the UX changes and all that kind of stuff is gonna be a slog for sure, after the protocol is added, and that's been the case also with our previous shielded pools.
Yeah, when I was doing some background research on you, I've been told that you have a superhero story, like an actual superhero backstory, and I was wondering what that is.
It's a secret. It's a secret. It's nothing I'm like super ashamed of or anything like that. It probably gives me street cred, and it's probably like interesting and cool, and I should be bragging about it, but I don't like telling people about it or talking about it yet. But someday, I know that superhero backstory is alluded to a lot, but I'm just like, I've been doing a lot of crazy crypto and hacking stuff since I was a kid, and so I've done some things that I couldn't even believe now. I was looking back that I'd done pretty amazing stuff. I can't wait to brag about it someday, but I have too much to work on, and I don't want to be distracted. And that would definitely be a distraction to talk about.
Okay. There was also a story about Greg Maxwell not citing you in a paper about ZK stuff.
No, I wouldn't. I'm not gonna play into that. I don't feel aggrieved by Greg Maxwell. So that's not a concern from my end. Other people may feel that way, but I don't feel that way.
I also read the story about you explaining to a bunch of, I think they were from, what's the name? Polkadot. A bunch of cryptographers from Polkadot, and basically breaking down all the stuff related to ZK SNARKs and explaining it to them, and how they were all taking notes, and how a lot of them got jobs specifically because they had to study the stuff that you built.
Yeah, I had this fun conversation with some of those people. where they actually came afterward and took me aside and said, "Hey, the reason why I'm doing all this stuff is because of reading your code and working on this paper." And I was like, "Wow, that's really cool to leave a legacy like that." That's the kind of legacy I like to leave. Going forward, I'm hoping I'm actually contributing more to like the next generation of really smart people that work on crypto tech and privacy tech, and encouraging them and motivating them and setting them up for success, because they'll do far more than I could ever dream of. And that would be a much better legacy than me sitting around solving problems myself here and there every once in a while, every few years maybe, making incremental improvements. I think there's a huge value unlocking getting more people involved. And so I'm really glad to hear stories like that. That's really cool. That puts a smile on my face for sure.
What was your username on Bitcoin Talk? Because I've been told that you also have a pretty interesting activity there.
Oh, if you search for it and you find it, then you deserve this. You deserve it. I'm not going to make it that easy, but yeah, I used to in high school years, or pre-high school, well, yeah, early high school years, I used to hang out obviously on Bitcoin Talk, and one of the things I did a long time ago is I invested in one of those like early ASIC mining companies. Actually, the first company that actually shipped ASIC miners
Butterfly
on
Labs?
Bitcoin. It's before then. It was before Butterfly Labs were able to ship. It was a Chinese company that I don't know, called BitFountain, I think, or something like that. Maybe it was called something else. But anyway, they shipped something called the ASIC miner block eruptor blade, and they were first to market. They were first to tape out, so to speak. And I bought at auction one of their. I was like a shareholder in this company. It was really weird. They went public on the Bitcoin Talk forums and took a ton of money to do their tape out. They succeeded, and then paid dividends back on this like shady pseudo securities market that existed. I forget what it was called, but they paid all their investors back and then some, which was really just crazy because they were just some anonymous Chinese company. They're long gone now, but I invested in them. I actually have a Bitcoin miner right now. Let's see if I could swivel my. I'll swivel my camera so you can see the Bitcoin miner. There it is. That's the ASIC miner that I bought a long time ago. I bought it at auction because it was one of the first 10 that had first 10 ASIC boards that had been produced for Bitcoin. Well.
Are you still working on Bitcoin stuff, or are you still paying attention to the development?
Well, not. I mean, I kind of pay attention. I'm not too involved in it. I'm kind of pessimistic about that world because it doesn't move quickly, and a lot of the people there don't feel like there is a need to, because the Bitcoin price goes up without problems being resolved. So from their perspective, there isn't really an impetus to actually improve the tech and the privacy, especially. But instead of being pessimistic, I wanted to, like, you had mentioned something earlier, way earlier in the podcast episode, where you'd mentioned that you had been kind of pessimistic, especially with some of the debates about like the op return stuff and everything else. That kind of was a little discouraging for you. I'll leave. I think I'm gonna call it quits on the episode. I'm getting a little tired, but I do want to leave with some optimistic notes. And one of them I want to leave is that Bitcoin does have a superpower, which is that it's extremely constrained, and that's not me just being like, I mean that sincerely. Constraints breed creativity, and some of the clever things that are being built to overcome the constraints in Bitcoin are things that nobody would have thought of doing were it not for the fact that those constraints existed. And some of those things like shielded CSV and the BitVM stuff and Glock and all the rest of this stuff that's been coming out over the last several years, will be useful outside of those constraints eventually. I'm sure, and also will improve. And there's some really brilliant cryptographers working on all that, as you know. And so I'm really excited to see how things develop there. So I don't think Bitcoin is the end of the world for Bitcoin. There are benefits and there are downsides to the like ossification and to the restrictive nature of the consensus building in their community and the tech stack. So I wouldn't count them out yet, but I certainly from a personal perspective, we can execute way faster in a chain like Zcash. We can ship this tech years before other coins can, and obviously Bitcoin would probably never be able to ship some of the stuff that we shipped like 10 years ago. So that's why I work on Zcash. That's why I believe in Zcash.
Yeah, you mentioned that you want to go, but I do have one last question that I got as a shielded message. Can you talk more about the developers involved in Zcash in general? The GitHub has almost 500 contributors. Are they all part of the team? Who decides what gets accepted in the code? Who decides? He repeats the question.
Historically, the Zcash network has been built on top of this C++ node that was a fork of Bitcoin, and called Zcash, and that was maintained by the Electric Coin Company, which I used to work for. And we've slowly been migrating to a Rust language implementation of Zcash called Zebra. And one of the goals there was just to be able to iterate quicker, and also the architecture, the old legacy architecture we forked off from Bitcoin was really crummy, and it doesn't really correspond well with the kinds of changes we made. The philosophies in the Bitcoin world, especially around soft forks and hard forks and things like that. We haven't entirely embraced those in Zcash. So, among other things. So a ground up rewrite of the Zcash protocol in Rust with Zebra is going to potentially unlock a lot of quick iteration and speed. And one of the ways it'll do that is that there's going to be a lot of forks of the Zebra code base and people independently contributing their network upgrade code, different teams, and getting other teams to agree and getting the community at large to agree. And the question exactly how that governance works is there's other people thinking about that much more than I am, but it's a very widespread process that involves a lot of people. It involves a lot of different signals from the community to decide whether things are considered like a legitimate improvement to the protocol that everyone's kind of consenting to. And there's always the threat that that the coin will fork, that Zcash will fork. And this is something that we've embraced since the beginning. We call it friendly forks. So we want to help people fork Zcash and make competitors to us if they think that our protocol is changing in ways they disagree with, or we try to fiddle with the parameters in some way, or they think they can execute better, or we're blocking the changes that they want to build, whatever. We totally embrace forks. And there's been many forks over the years in Zcash. None of them have really succeeded, but we definitely like encourage them because they are the ultimate check on our project to make sure that we build consensus and then gives users a way to exit in case they disagree with the progress we're making or disagree with the progress we're not making. So that's sort of my thinking to answer the question about merging. Well, I mean, there's different forks of Zebra. There's a Zcash repository. There's different kinds of full nodes you can run now. You don't really have to ask for permission to develop and improve Zcash, but getting everyone on board is much trickier. And it's not just one team and one developer. There's no benevolent dictator of Zcash currently, and probably there won't be anytime soon.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your time and for everything. Thanks to everyone who asked questions using these shielded messages. It's very cool. But as you said, they're sort of bloating the blockchain.
That doesn't mean they're bad. It just means that we need a different way to. It potentially just means that we need a different way to technically integrate that into the protocol than the way they're currently integrated. But people really love those memos. They're really cool.
Yeah,
and they've been really fun throughout this episode.
Yeah, and thanks to them, we've added 20 more of them to the Orchard pool. So basically, we increased everyone's anonymity. Not by much, but it's something. People look at, like, there's the Havino. I don't know what you call this. It's a peer-to-peer marketplace on Monero. And he's hating in the comments right now, says 95% of, he calls it Z-trash, transactions are completely traced. And if you think their niche Zashi wallet will fix their privacy, you didn't learn a damn thing during the lockdowns, clot shot mandates, and social distancing. The primrose path to non-fungible hell is paved in Z-trash. This is harsh, man. I wish they actually listened, but...
That person paid you to read that out, or are they just talking crap on Twitter?
No, they're just talking crap on Twitter.
Oh, you gotta... Oh, screw that. You need to at least add a little bit of Sybil resistance, a little bit at least, to this. You need to accept Zcash only for chat.
I mean, they did propagate this conspiracy that I'm sort of paid by the Electric Coin Foundation, company foundation, I don't even know at this point, or that I'm on the payroll or something, and that's why I post so much about Zcash. But to me, it's super exciting that it's evolving. It's 100% compatible with Bitcoin. If Bitcoin ever decides to add privacy, this is the way, and this is the best way so far. There's also the Mimblewimble extension block that was shipped on Litecoin, but it doesn't offer the same privacy advantages. It's sort of weaker. It scales better, but it's not as powerful as ZK SNARKs. And I'm super excited about this. People come up with theories like, what the hell, why is this guy talking about Zcash now? I was so right about the price. I did the zebra dance. There's gonna be a short clip of that. I've asked someone to do it by tomorrow. And also, where was I going with this? I'm also getting a bit tired. Oh yeah, someone moved the goalpost, some guy from the Monero camp, and said, okay, it's sort of obvious that he's not on the payroll, but maybe he's receiving some anonymous donations or transactions from the Zcash team. And I was like, so did you just acknowledge that Zcash is anonymous? And she's like, oh no, I did not say that.
Yeah, that's funny.
Anyway, I just got paid with these small transactions that I received. This is more than I would ever expect. It's cool that it works like this. I wish Bitcoin had it. It was supposed to have it back in 2013. We never got it. Maybe this time, who knows? Maybe if the price goes up to like $1,000, Bitcoiners will stop shitting on it and pay attention to what's happening. And we have another debate. And they're going to be like, hey, maybe we would not have this filter conversation if we couldn't know what's inside the transactions. I don't know. Yep. I'm just daydreaming right now.
Let's hope. Let's hope for sure.
Thank you very much, Sean. Where can people follow your progress with the work on Tachyon?
For now, I have my X account, EBFull, and my blog, SeanBowe.com, on SeanBowe.com, which I'm going to be doing some posts on there soon about some recent developments. And then I'm setting up a Tachyon website, which is coming up soon. So be on the lookout for that. And I'm hiring, by the way. Reach out if you're interested and you like Rust and you like crypto and privacy.
And for the record,
this
interview made the number go up by $14, so take that, haters.
Okay, all right.
Thank you guys for listening. Thank you, Sean, for your time, and I'll see you in the next one.